Chapter 321 Hard-Headed Grim Reapers. Paimon's gaze shifted back to Daniel. We can't allow you to meet the monarch. But this rule cannot be changed. Only the bloodline of the monarch can step into the palace. Daniel frowned. What about the world core? The monarch will take care of it. He can't. Suddenly, his words caught in his throat as a suffocating pressure surrounded him. The air thickened, pressing down on his chest. Paimon's gaze turned sharp. Her crimson eyes narrowed. An oppressive aura spread out from her. Choose your next words carefully, chosen of the second prince. We won't tolerate any insult towards monarch. Huff, huff. Daniel's body was shivering when Paimon retracted her aura. The air felt heavy, pressing against his chest as he calmed his breathing and carefully thought of his words before speaking them aloud. I'm a regressor. The angel has come out of the world's core over 400 times. It's clear monarch needs our help. Quote. Paimon's brows furrowed. Her expression was unreadable as she processed his words. As a Grand Duchess of the Underworld, she was privy to a lot of sensitive information, more than most beings could comprehend. She had known for some time now that many time users were seeing visions of other timelines. Clearly, the world had entered a time loop, an endless cycle of decay and rebirth. Still, Paimon shook her head. The monarch has told us to leave the protection of the world's core to him. Trying to help him when he told us to do otherwise is the same as undermining his authority. We won't do that. But the world will end, Daniel said. If that is monarch's wish, then so be it. Daniel was stunned. The weight of her words crushed him more than the oppressive atmosphere. He couldn't understand why Paimon, someone who was nigh omnipotent, held such blind devotion for the monarch. She was plenty strong herself. Strong enough to make her own choices. The world ended once again. Paimon let the world's core be destroyed because the monarch didn't ask for help. The angel reclaimed the world, leaving Daniel once more adrift in the cycle. In the next loops, Daniel tried to meet other Grim Reapers. They had a variety of personalities, some cold and detached, others sorrowful and grim, or happy GP lucky. But their devotion to monarch was the same as Paimon's, if not more. Daniel had to undergo more loops. He tried to sneak around the underworld, hoping to reach the palace of monarch himself. It was impossible to achieve with the Grim Reapers serving as the palace's security. Even the weakest Grim Reaper was stronger than Typhaon. It was obvious Daniel couldn't defeat them or force his way into the palace. Daniel tried everything for the next 500 loops. Coaxing, manipulation, blackmailing, bribery. Nothing worked. To put it nicely, the Grim Reapers were kind people who served the monarch wholeheartedly. To put it bluntly, they were hard-headed and would call east-west if monarch told them to do so. Monarch's words were absolute. Neo wanted to try to talk with the Grim Reapers and see if he could help Daniel. However, it was impossible. Over the course of centuries, he had exhausted his intent. It was barely surviving within Daniel. Soon, the intent would disappear from the past. He had to use the intent only when it was necessary. He stopped talking with Daniel too. Each word he spoke with Daniel caused the intent to exhaust itself further. Neo, in the present, was in a worse condition. His body had completely crumbled away. Only a humanoid mass of red lightning was left behind, crackling weakly. The red lightning was slowly dimming, flickering like a dying flame. Daniel kept looping. He saw no chance of breakthrough. After centuries, exhausted and angry, he decided to go on another break. His first idea of relaxation was beating the hell out of Typhaon. Ellipsis. The battlefield was a shattered wasteland, scorched earth and broken stone spreading in every direction. Storm clouds loomed overhead, rumbling ominously as streaks of red lightning danced above. You know, I hate you to the core, Daniel said as he sat over the giant body of Typhon, his breath fogging in the cold air. Why? Typhon groaned. You activated that portal inside the world's core, didn't you? It's enough of a reason for me to hate you. I'm sorry, Typhon spoke meekly. It seemed like a good idea back then. Sorry. You think that works? Close that portal, or I'll keep beating you. I see can't, sir. I created the portal using the knowledge I got from the Child of Mana. I don't know how to close it. The topic of the Child of Mana pissed him off further. He continued to beat Typhaon, heal him, and beat him again with his fists. Wait, sir, I have an idea. Typhaon shouted to make Daniel stop. What is it? Daniel stopped his fists. His knuckles were bloodied from repeated use. Sweat dripped from his forehead, staining the cracked floor beneath him. If it isn't a good idea, get ready for another round of beating. The portal opens when I'm killed, sir. It won't open if I'm alive. Daniel's face stiffened. It was his first time hearing about this. Is that true? Yes. Quote ellipsis quote. Daniel had no words left. Sir, I don't trust you. Without hesitation, Daniel killed Typhaon once more. His blade sliced cleanly through the silence. The loop reset. For the next 10 loops, Daniel verified Typhaon's statement. Each time, the angel appeared within 1 day to 1 week after Typhaon's death. Damn, the answer was so simple. Daniel clenched his fists, pacing the scorched battlefield where corpses had long since turned to ash. I just had to keep Typhaon alive. The task was seemingly simple. But it turned out to be a nightmare of highest difficulty. If Daniel kept Typhaon imprisoned, Typhaon would become depressed and kill himself in despair. If Daniel gave Typhaon a different continent and let him rule others, Typhaon's growth speed would soon surpass other awakeners. Chapter 322 Successfully Saving the Past. The power twisted his mind, and soon he grew cocky, leading his armies in a quest for world conquest. In every timeline, it ended the same. Either Typhaon killed everyone, or Daniel was forced to kill Typhaon. Daniel ran his hands through his damp hair. What the hell am I supposed to do? He was frustrated. If I force him to stay normally, he kills himself. If I let him do what he wants, he gets killed by other awakeners or he kills the world. The cycles dragged on. Failure after failure. 80 loops went by but nothing changed. Daniel was pissed. His patience, worn thinner than parchment, finally snapped. Then he remembered. He was supposed to be on a break. The discovery of the link between Typhaon's death and the angel's arrival had transformed his holiday into endless work. Seeking some form of relief, Daniel stepped into the underworld. Here, at least, he could abuse his, chosen of the second prince, privilege as much as he wanted without consequence. Is there some problem? Paimon asked, her silk robes trailing behind her as she toured the Reaper cities. Her eyes glowed faintly, as if peering into Daniel's soul. Daniel nodded with an exhausted expression. His body ached from the recent fight against a rogue ghost cave that had been plotting to escape the underworld. Though victorious, the battle had left him drained. Due to his exhaustion, he didn't realize he was explaining everything related to Typhaon's problem to Paimon. If we are not wrong, Typhon needs a place that he can rule as a king. At the same time, you have to make sure Typhaon is weaker than other beings in his surroundings so that he can't think of starting a war. Paimon questioned. Yes, Daniel said. Then, isn't it okay if you bring Typhon here? We can give a place to the monster in this realm, Paimon suggested. Isn't dying the only way to come to the underworld? That is. Daniel stopped speaking. His eyes widened with sudden realization. Paimon smiled as she watched his expression shift. Grim Reapers. Daniel shouted. If I can make Typhon a Grim Reaper, he can remain in the underworld. Then, you can use your authority to make him the ruler of a small island or a city. Indeed, Paimon agreed with a slight nod. Her expression turned more serious as she added. The only problem is that the living aren't allowed to become Grim Reapers. Daniel's smile vanished. Are you joking with me? Doesn't that mean I can't make Typhaon a Grim Reaper? It's not like you'll break the rules. I will, Paimon interrupted sharply. Daniel blinked, taken aback by her sudden resolve. The world of the living is a place where the princes will reincarnate, Paimon continued. If we can help you save the world, then we will gladly do so. Daniel was shocked. Didn't you say you wouldn't break any rules? You didn't even let me go to the palace of the monarch. I refused to go against the orders of the monarch directly, Paimon said, folding her arms. But if it's something as simple as allowing a living soul to become a Grim Reaper, then that can be done within my jurisdiction. I am the Grand Duchess, after all. Paimon helped Daniel make Typhaon a Grim Reaper. The father of anomalies was brought to the underworld. Of course, he didn't want to do it. But Daniel's stick and carrot method he had learned from countless time loops worked wonders, and Typhaon agreed. Paimon had to step down from her position as the Grand Duchess because of her actions of abusing her authority. She did it willingly, saying she had been looking for a way to retire since ages. The other Grim Reapers tried to persuade her otherwise. They declared they would bring Typhaon using their authority and she shouldn't carry the burden alone. But she remained adamant. 50 years passed, peacefully. The world of the living had no idea what happened. For them, Typhaon, the father of anomalies, a terror that could destroy the world, disappeared suddenly one day. In the underworld, Daniel also became a Grim Reaper. It was why he could travel between the world of living and the underworld. He left the underworld after he made sure Typhaon wouldn't kill itself. After doing everything, Daniel returned to his hometown. He stood there, motionless, staring at the evening sun dipping below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of orange and purple. The broken streets were quiet. The distant sound of rustling leaves was the only thing accompanying him. Wow. Daniel exhaled, watching his breath become visible in the cooling air. I did it. Didn't I, system? He was too shocked to even laugh. The weight of countless battles and sacrifices pressed on his chest like a phantom ache. I stopped the world's end. It felt surreal. He almost expected another disaster to occur at the last second and foil his plans like a ways. But nothing of sorts happened. Daniel felt countless strange emotions after reaching the end of his journey. Relief, exhaustion, and disbelief. A smile appeared on his face, small but genuine. We did it, system. Daniel laughed, his voice echoing softly in the empty streets. He called out to the system to celebrate the occasion. Thousands of years of their struggle had finished. However, system. There was no response. Ellipsis. Present. We did it. Neo opened his eyes. He looked at Professor Daniel with a smile. The past has been saved. The world around them started to shake. It was the proof the timeline was changing. Neo's erosion accelerated. His body made of red lightning started to disappear. Professor Daniel opened his mouth and closed it. He had no words. How was he supposed to tell Neo everything would be fine when he knew it was impossible? Goodbye, Neo said with a smile. You should leave now, or you will be caught here in the mess. He looked at Professor Daniel in the eye. Chapter 323. Not every fairy tale has a happy ending. Professor Daniel looked at Neo with a concerned gaze. He squeezed words out of his mouth. How are you going to survive this? I can't. Neo smiled bitterly. My plan failed. Professor Daniel's face hardened. He had been feeling guilt for leaving so much responsibility on Neo. But he had hoped Neo would be able to change the past and survive. Because Neo had been confident about his survival. What changed now? Professor Daniel stopped speaking. The realization dawned on him. Neo, are you in the shadow trial right now? The air grew colder. Neo's lips parted slightly, but no words came. He had told them he had entered the shadow trial in the past. He had worded his explanation carefully, making Professor Daniel think he had failed his shadow trial and been thrown out of the shadow world by the supreme deity of shadow. He made them believe this was the real world, and that he wanted to correct the mistakes he did during the shadow trial. Neo, I asked something. Neo didn't answer. If he told Professor Daniel the truth, that he was in a shadow world, Professor Daniel standing before him would realize he was just a shadow. The real Professor Daniel would think the same. That he was a shadow. After all, changes in a 100% synchronized shadow world were carried into the real world. What would happen to real Professor Daniel if he believed he was just a shadow? Professor Daniel might go insane. It wouldn't be the first time something like this had happened to someone. Neo didn't want to burden Professor Daniel with such knowledge. However, his silence spoke plenty. Professor Daniel's expression contorted. You're worried about me in this situation. I can't not worry about the hero who saved the world. Neo's smile made Professor Daniel's heart feel even heavier. Neo's plan to survive had been simple. When the young Daniel saved the child of Mana, Neo's shadow trial would be completed. After all, young Daniel was Neo's proxy. Him saving the child of Mana would be counted as Neo performing the rescue. He couldn't save the child of Mana though, Neo thought. Not that I blame him. I was with him, so I know he tried his best. Saving the child of Mana would have given Neo a chance to request a reward from the Shadow Supreme. Neo had understood long ago that the reward he received before wasn't a reward at all. This time, he planned to ask the Shadow Supreme to let him take Angel out of the shadow world. It was to fulfill his promise of saving the angel. I was wondering how you would survive the ire of time. The angel's voice resonated in his mind. So that was your plan? Yeah, Neo said. The place where Neo stood was the shadow world. It was a dimension where everything was made from shadow elementals. Even time and fate. The time trying to kill him was the mimic time belonging to the shadow world. It was not true time. As long as he could return to the earth dimension, he would escape the reach of the mimic time. Then, he wouldn't have to worry about the mimic time erasing him. It was a perfect plan. A plan that fell apart when he couldn't save the child of Mana. Now, the mimic time would erase him along with the present. Or, if he tried to leave the shadow world to escape the mimic time, the Shadow Supreme would kill him for failing the shadow trial. It was a checkmate. You are awfully calm for someone who found out they are going to die even though they were promised otherwise, Neo jabbed at the angel. The guy who caused my death is dying with me, so I'm fine with it. The angel shrugged. Professor Daniel couldn't decide what to do anymore as he saw Angel and Neo talk normally. His eyes darted between them. The world continued to crumble. Time was erasing their present. Professor Daniel, I'm okay. You don't need to worry about me. Neo looked at him with a calm smile. Please leave now. If you stay here any longer, it will be dangerous for you. Professor Daniel's soul was trying to flow back into his body since long ago. He had been resisting the pull until now, hoping to see if Neo had a way of surviving the ordeal. Goodbye, Neo said with a faint smile. He hoped his smile would reassure Professor Daniel, but it did the opposite. The professor's heart clenched. Professor Daniel could no longer resist the pull. His soul was violently reeled back into his body, the sensation disorienting and painful. Before he disappeared completely, he heard Neo's last words. Please don't do anything that could endanger the world. Professor Daniel's eyes snapped open. The sensation of solid ground under him returned abruptly. He was back to his own present. His chest heaved with ragged breaths, and his body trembled with exhaustion. The room was quiet except for his labored breathing. Cold sweat clung to his forehead. What did you see, Professor? Professor Daniel flinched when he heard Neo's voice. He didn't answer immediately. Neo, who had just awakened his time element thanks to Professor Daniel and Elizabeth's help, was confused by Professor Daniel's silence. The professor opened his mouth, then closed it, unable to form words. He wanted to tell Neo what would happen in the future. But Neo's last words bound him like chains. Please don't do anything that could endanger the world. If he did anything wrong, he could destroy the world Neo barely saved after countless years of struggle. Professor, are you okay? Neo turned around and stared at him with a concerned gaze. Watching Neo like this calmed Professor Daniel, if only for a moment. I'm fine. He wiped the sweat from his forehead. What did you see? Quote ellipsis quote. Instead of answering, he placed his hand gently on Neo's back. His gaze carried slight fear and something else that Neo failed to see. Guilt. Sorrow. Professor Daniel pushed Neo into the past so that he could return to the beginning of the academy. It put a huge strain on Professor Daniel. His breathing grew ragged, the world around him tilting slightly as the backlash gnawed at his soul. However, he ignored it. Neo's words continued to ring in his ears. Goodbye, Professor Daniel. Goodbye, Neo. The waves of time rammed into Professor Daniel. He had used too much time to help Neo awaken his time element and it weakened Professor Daniel. He time slipped, leaving behind an empty office room. Chapter 324. If it's not a happy ending, then it's not the end. Age of Gods. System. Daniel called out. There was no reply. System, where did you go? The voice that had been with him for thousands of years did not reply back. Silence pressed against his ears. Daniel's heart was beating loudly. The absence of the system only meant one thing. It had left. Divine system, my ass. You left as soon as I saved the world. Daniel's voice was bitter. He had always had an inkling the system's goal was not to make him the strongest but to save the world. He was just a tool for it. And now, discarded. Yet, he wasn't sad about the revelation. If not for the system, he wouldn't have been able to save the world. Still, his heart was strangely heavy. Did the system only see him as a tool? He wanted to know. Yet there was no way for it. The system had left him behind. Suddenly, a familiar yet unfamiliar voice called out to him, soft but clear, cutting through the wind. What are you going to do now? Daniel snapped his head towards the voice. His eyes widened as he took in her face. The woman was familiar. There was no way Daniel could forget her. Celine. No, you can't be my sister. Her soul and body were both. Daniel frowned and his throat tightened. A lump formed there, bitter and cold. His hand clenched into a fist at his side as realization sank in. A sigh left his lips. He shook his head, turning back to look at the vast, overcast sky. You really have a sick sense of humor, Typhaon. If you did that with someone else, they would have attacked you by now. I see. The girl's appearance shifted. She transformed into a humanoid figure composed entirely of intertwining roots and branches. The earthy scent of damp soil filled the air as small leaves sprouted from his wooden frame. I apologize if my appearance was unpleasant. Daniel felt a strange discomfort hearing Typhaon speak so respectfully. The father of anomalies, once proud and defiant, now spoke with humility. Living in the underworld had opened his eyes. In the abyss where countless monsters capable of destroying the earth roamed freely, Typhaon had been forced to confront his own insignificance. Once, he had thought himself peerless. Now, he knew better. The underworld had humbled him. Typhaon stepped forward in silence. His wooden frame creaked softly as he moved, standing beside Daniel. He followed Daniel's gaze and, together, they stared at the sky. What are you doing? Daniel asked, his voice breaking the silence. Thinking. Thinking what? Your system. Is it the same guy you told us about? Quote. Question mark quote. Daniel blinked, confused. Typhaon's gaze didn't shift from the sky. Kronos told you about someone. A guy who had been fighting alone after the world ended, right? You mentioned it once. I'm asking if he's the one who sent you the system. Daniel's face hardened. Typhaon's words stirred thoughts he'd been trying to suppress. Thoughts he was too afraid to confront. Yeah. Daniel's voice lowered, trailing off. Maybe it was him. Typhaon tilted his head slightly. The branches creaked as he shifted. What will happen to him now? If he's stuck in that future, now that the past has been changed, wouldn't he get erased by time? Why are you so curious about him? Daniel interrupted sharply, turning to face Typhaon. The wooden figure chuckled. A dry, hollow sound echoed. How can I not be interested? I've dreamt of him defeating me with a single attack. And if I'm not wrong, he's the one who helped you defeat me. Is it wrong of me to be curious about the person who is, in a sense, my arch-nemesis? There was no malice in Typhaon's voice, only plain curiosity. I don't know what happened to him, Daniel answered with a sigh. The system disappeared before I could get any answers. As that's so, I thank you for entertaining my curiosity. Typhaon turned as he prepared to leave. He had come to the world of the living to capture an escaped ghost. Meeting Daniel now was nothing but coincidence. Leaving already? Daniel asked. I am tight on time, Typhaon replied. After I catch the escaped ghosts, I have to meet with the leader of the Titans and the Awakener Association. Quote. Question mark quote. The underworld is thinking of setting up a post in the world of the living, Typhaon continued. It's to catch the increasing number of souls that escape from the underworld and the monsters that Awakeners summon into this realm. Since I'm the only living Grim Reaper and I've lived in the world of the living until recently, the others believed I was the best person for this task, Typhaon explained. Good luck with that, Daniel said. Daniel didn't know whether to laugh or facepalm. The one who sent Typhaon for negotiations was either a genius or a complete fool. Looks like even Typhaon is starting to look at the future. Daniel's smile dimmed as the word echoed in his mind. Future. It was a word Daniel had always wanted to reach. A destination he had chased for so long. But now that he stood within it, he felt hollow, adrift with no direction. He looked down at his hand, watching as his fingers flexed. Despite his thin arms, he knew he could probably blow up the entire earth with a single punch. All this power, it's thanks to him. Daniel closed his eyes. His brows furrowed, and his chest tightened as conflicting emotions tore at him. He had reached the future he once dreamed of. But what should he do with it now? He had no idea. Then, was there anything he wanted to do or was curious about? There was. He wanted to know one thing. Why did the man behind the system choose him? Why him and not others? It's probably because I'm the only one who can undergo thousands of regressions and not get killed by time. He sighed. There was one more thing he wanted to know, but he was afraid of the answer he would find. Why did the man behind the system help him save the world? Now, the man's present would get erased, and he would die. Why did he do that? It would have made sense if the man left the earth to live somewhere else, instead of dying like this. Damn it, this question won't let me sleep. Daniel stared at his hands, calloused and trembling slightly. Power. He had so much of it. Power. Given to him by that man. Might as well use this power to go meet him and ask the question. Daniel closed his eyes and delved into himself. He searched for the system's traces. The system had disappeared. However, the traces were left within him. After all, the techniques embedded in Daniel belonged to the system. He grabbed them and used his trait. Daniel's evolved trait allowed him to look into the future of people. His trait activated. But some kind of barrier stopped him. A pulse of resistance rippled through the air, making the light shudder. Daniel felt the time elementals churning around him. Time was stopping him. Chapter 325. If it's not a happy ending, then it's not the end, too. The man behind the system existed in a timeline that would soon get erased. It was a timeline that shouldn't exist. Daniel could feel it. Time was telling him not to go there. Time had always showered Daniel with care. If not for it, Daniel couldn't have regressed thousands of times and not get punished by a time death. Time never asked Daniel for compensation. This was Time's first request for Daniel. Don't go to the time that shouldn't exist. Going there would be an insult to Time. Daniel would fall out of favor with Time if he did not stop. There was a high chance he would never be able to regress again. Time warned him. If he didn't listen to it, he would regret it. Sorry, Daniel said. His time elementals flared. They clashed against the ambient time elementals. Wisps of energy drifted around him. He increased the output of his trait. Time tried to stop him. It requested Daniel. Again and again. The requests turned into threats. Daniel could tell his actions were angering Time. Yet he didn't stop. Daniel had to go there. He needed to meet the man. To thank him. To ask him why he had done so much for their world. The barrier stopping Daniel shattered. His soul was pulled out of his body. His vision blurred as reality twisted around him. He blinked and appeared in a broken world. The place was devastated. The sky was filled with ashes, and the ground was burned and cracked. Maggots writhed in every crevice Daniel looked. The edges of the world were crumbling away. It was the proof Time was erasing the world. Why are you here? Daniel turned to the source of the voice. He saw a humanoid mass of red lightning. Bolts arced around its body, flickering weakly. It was slowly disappearing. You. Daniel's words were struck in his throat when he noticed the man's condition. He wasn't even alive anymore. He was forcefully keeping his existence together with death element. Why? He had prepared countless questions to ask the man. But only a single word left his mouth when they met. Why what? Neo asked, surprised but having expected Daniel to come meet him. Why did you do all this? What was in it for you? Neo chuckled at Daniel's naive question. Do I need a reason to save my home? Quote ellipsis dot. That's the only reason why you struggled for thousands of years. A look of fury appeared on Daniel's face. That's the only reason you gave away everything you had to me. Why are you angry? Why won't I be angry? Daniel glared at him. It was you who taught me to be selfish. You told me it was okay to do whatever I wanted. And you are doing this. Sacrificing yourself for what? Greater good. Daniel felt an intense surge of anger. It was why he did not want to meet the man. If you did not take breaks between loops, your mental self would have been crushed. That's why I told you to be selfish, Neo answered. And what about you? You don't need to worry about yourself. Neo let out a troubled smile. The last thing he expected after meeting Daniel was getting shouted at. Calm down. Why did you come to the past to save the child of Mana? Daniel asked, cutting off Neo. Quote ellipsis question mark quote. There had to be a reason if you were trying to save my sister. It was my shadow trial. Neo didn't see the reason for hiding the truth. Shadow trial. Daniel's eyes narrowed. You tried to make me save my sister too. Was it also related to your trial? Kind of. Neo chuckled. If we could have saved your sister, I wouldn't be getting erased by time here. But well, saving the world is good enough. Anyway, congratulations on. Then I'll save my sister. Daniel cut off Neo abruptly. He had expected Neo to have a reason for trying to save Child of Mana. He asked Neo for the reason to as he wanted to give Neo a parting gift. But this was better. Saving his sister would save Neo. It was two birds with one stone. If I save her, I can save you too, right? Without waiting for an answer, Daniel advanced toward Neo. There is no way I'm letting the guy who saved the world die. His voice was filled with defiance. It's already too much. You aren't getting either a reward or recognition for it, but dying for saving the world. He took a sharp breath, his words laced with a growing intensity. That's crossing the line. Daniel felt stupid for thinking that system might have seen him as a tool. The only thing he saw as a tool was himself. A tool to help others. You aren't dying under my watch. He stepped back, looking Neo in the eye. I'll save you, no matter what. That's impossible. Nothing is impossible for me, Daniel spoke with confidence. I'm the man who regressed thousands of times and survived. If I can do that, then I can do anything I put my mind to. Neo chuckled. Was this how Neo looked to others when he claimed he would do something impossible? I wonder if you can back your words, Neo said. Watch me do it. Daniel's soul form started to tremble. His trait's activation time was about to run out. Goodbye, Neo said. See you later, Daniel replied. Daniel's soul was pulled back into his body. His eyes snapped open. He was back to his own present. Before he could move, his legs gave out. He fell face first into the ground. Quote ellipsis dot question mark quote. Daniel realized he was breathing heavily. His clothes were drenched in sweat. Ignoring everything, He tried to activate the world time spell. The spell failed. It didn't take Daniel long to realize what was wrong. Time. It refused to let him go back. Daniel wasn't disheartened. He had expected this. Besides, going back in time wasn't going to help. He had regressed over 1,000 times, yet he could never save Celine. Chapter 326, First Child of Mana. As he stayed there on the ground, the realization dawned on him. He couldn't regress anymore. He no longer had infinite tries. There was only chance. If he failed, Neo would die. He stood up after he had recovered and moved with haste. The underworld was where the dead ended. After countless inquiries, Daniel confirmed that Celine's soul never came to underworld. The cause was obvious. Typhon had destroyed both her soul and body. I apologize for it, Typhon said as he and Daniel sat at a small, round table in a quiet, dimly lit cafe within the underworld's neutral zone. The air smelled faintly of bitter coffee and burnt wood. The walls lined with old tomes and half-melted candles. It's fine. That's already water under the bridge, Daniel responded, suppressing his inner turmoil. He exhaled slowly before adding. Did you ask about the resurrection methods? I've consulted high-ranking Grim Reapers on the matter. They're said there is no way to revive someone who never reached the underworld. I see. Daniel left the place after his meeting with Typhaon. He looked everywhere in the underworld, and met countless people. Everyone gave him the same answer. Those whose souls were erased could not be revived. Again and again, they told him to abandon his goal of resurrecting Celine. Daniel refused to surrender to despair. He returned to the world of the living, hoping to meet Athena. If anyone could know of a hidden method of resurrection, it would be her. She was the child of Mana. People like her had wealth of knowledge. Gaining an audience with her was no simple matter. Daniel's reputation, or lack thereof, proved to be an obstacle. For everyone except the Grim Reapers, Daniel was a nameless awakener. He had not bothered with his connection in the world of living in current life, not expecting they would come in handy now. After pulling countless strings and calling in every favor, Grim Reapers, he finally met Athena. They talked for a long time. So, you don't have a resurrection method? Daniel asked. I'm sorry, but I don't. Then he asked her about the children of Mana. She told him a lot about them. They could gain information about the future. It was different from the visions of the future that time elemental users had. The children of Mana were told about the future by the world, or so Athena said. That's all, you know? Daniel asked after listening to her explanation. Yes. So you mean, the information, the records, all of that is given to you by the world? Yes. Are you sure? 90%. Yes. Daniel wasn't convinced. For one, why would the world core have information about the future? Besides, Earth's world core was too unfriendly. There was no way it would willingly share information. After his meeting with Athena, he went to space and met with the moon's consciousness. My dear friend, Daniel. What brings you here? The moon's consciousness asked. Daniel greeted her and asked if a world kept a record of all knowledge. No. The moon's consciousness replied, sounding genuinely puzzled. This is the first time I'm hearing of something like this. I don't think Earth keeps any records. Even if it did have something like records, there is no reason for Earth to possess knowledge about the future, the moon's consciousness explained. Thank you for answering me, Daniel said. He stayed there a little longer, having a small party with the moon's consciousness at her request. The problem remained. Daniel had not found a way of reviving Celine yet. He continued his search for a method. Days, weeks, years passed. Time blurred into a haze as he scoured both the underworld and the world of the living, desperately seeking a solution. There is no way it's impossible to revive Celine, Daniel muttered under his breath. If it's impossible, then that means we haven't found the information yet. His condition got worse as he stopped caring about his health and kept his focus on his search. He read as much as he could and met as many people as he could. He immersed himself in knowledge. He learned any type of information he came across, hoping it would help him in reviving Celine. The Grim Reapers began to worry about Daniel's health. They told Daniel countless times to give up. They didn't understand why Daniel was trying to revive his sister. It was impossible to revive her. Daniel refused to give up. No matter what, he would find a way. Years passed with no result. The once vibrant spark in his eyes dulled. A doubt started to creep into his heart. What if there was truly no way to help Neo? Daniel gritted his teeth and continued to move forward. The doubt remained in his heart. He, however, refused to give up. Neo had fought alone for centuries, even though he had no hope for victory. He did it for them. The few years of fruitless searches Daniel was going through were nothing in comparison. While Daniel was busy searching for a method to resurrect Selene, he came across a horrible truth. Daniel had been cursed by time. He had antagonized time when he went to meet Neo. As a result, time cursed Daniel to live forever. He couldn't die, grow old, or grow stronger. His body was frozen in time. Daniel ignored his own curse. All of his attention was on finding a method to solve his predicament. It was then Daniel found something. Ha 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 ha. Athena, this is crazy. His voice echoed in the grand library where towering bookshelves kissed the domed ceiling above. He took a book from Athena's library, named the Archives of Wisdom, and showed it to her. Never in his wildest dreams had he imagined he would find something among the novels written by Athena. What is it? Athena asked. This book. What is it? He repeated, his eyes wide with excitement. Athena tilted her head, glancing at the cover. That book has some interesting ideas I came up with. I plan to use them later in my novels. Exactly. Now, read this, Daniel urged. He turned the pages with care until he found the one he wanted. He tapped a section of text. Athena leaned closer and began to read aloud. Name. Euphemia Theodora. Specialty. Oldest known child of Mana. Time period. 3440 BCE tilde 3400 BCE. Description. Euphemia was able to see into the records of the world. She saw the strongest awakeners of the Apocalypse era. Zeus, Kronos, Gaia, Emma and others, and called them gods. Her tales spread over time and the awakeners in her stories were later known as gods in the history. Athena paused. There was a wealth of information about Euphemia, even a short story on her life at the bottom of the page. She closed the book gently. What about it? It's just an idea I had for my novel, Son of Zeus, to explain the existence of gods in real-world myths. But aren't your dreams real? Doesn't this mean this information is what you got from the records? Not all dreams are information from the records. I know, Daniel said quickly, flipping through more pages, his fingers brushing across the aged paper. But look at this. He spread the book open, showing her multiple entries filled with elaborate histories and mythological connections. Everything you've written. What's the pattern with it? Chapter 327 Creator of Akashic Record. Athena frowned, glancing over the texts. It's fantasy. Yes, it's all fantasy. But if we think about it the other way, you took inspiration from the dreams and everything you saw there was fantasy. He continued. What I think is, the records contain information about everything that happened after the Apocalypse era. They don't have all information, just the information of the time after Apocalypse era, not from before. How is my novels being fantasy related to the information of the records? She questioned. If your novels were based on information before the Apocalypse era, the genre would have been realism, urban, war, military, teenage romance. My point is, the genre couldn't have been fantasy as no fantasy elements existed in the era before the apocalypse. Daniel explained. She nodded, signaling for him to continue. The only realism genre story idea your diary has is this, he said, pointing at the Euphemia short story scribbled in faded ink. What about her? Athena asked, curiosity mingling with confusion. Now, if all information in the records is from the apocalypse era and the eras after, why is Euphemia's story here? She exists in an era that is thousands of years before the apocalypse. Maybe that Euphemia story is just a normal idea and not from the record, she suggested. Maybe you're right, but for now, let's just say it is from the record, Daniel said. Now answer my question. Why is Euphemia's information present in the record even though it shouldn't be there? What makes her unique? Because she is a child of Mana. Her tone was filled with uncertainty. Yes. And what's different about children of Mana? Daniel pressed. We can access records. Exactly. Daniel spoke at a fast pace, his excitement barely contained. I think accessing records isn't normal. Let's say records exist in a library which is in a separate dimension. The records can be accessed only once. To access the records repeatedly, the children of Mana need to leave a part of themselves inside the library, he said. What? Athena looked at Daniel with a strange gaze. The theory was too far-fetched even for her and she was an author. I know what you are thinking, but I can prove my theory. Answer my questions and you'll see, Daniel said in a calm voice. Go on, Athena replied. Can you input information in the records? Daniel questioned. No, Athena answered. I can only take out information. What about other children of Mana? Can they input information? They can't. I'm sure of it, she spoke with certainty. Why? It's a feeling. I can tell only the creator of the records can edit or change the information. Bingo. Daniel let out a triumphant smile. Children of Mana can't input the information. So how did Euphemia's information appear inside the records? Daniel continued. It shouldn't be there since the records contain information of the apocalypse era. And the eras that came after. Quote. Athena became silent. Daniel answered himself. A part of Euphemia is there. She told you her information. Quote. Let's say if your theory is true. Why would she tell me the information? I don't know about that. Maybe she is bored. Athena sighed, leaning against the chair. Daniel's theory sounded convincing, but it had no solid basis. For one, what would he do if the information about Euphemia was just a story she wrote and not actual knowledge taken from the records? Daniel understood her concerns. The unknown gnawed at both of them. Time passed as Daniel continued his research, traveling across ancient ruins and forgotten libraries, searching for more information. The world outside was vast, filled with remnants of lost civilizations, overgrown forests reclaiming stone fortresses, and winds whispering secrets of old. Another child of Mana appeared a few dozen years later. Daniel met him and asked his questions. The answers he received solidified his theory. A part of the existence of children of Mana stays within the records. Selene's must be there too. Now I need to find a way to bring her out from the record, Daniel muttered. He tried to see if Athena and the new child of Mana could find Selene in the records. They failed. After all, both of them couldn't access the records at will. Why isn't Selene trying to contact Athena and the others? If Euphemia can do it, can't she do it too? Daniel murmured. There was no answer to his question. Daniel kept researching. The more time he spent on his research, the more sure he became that he was correct. His eyes, bloodshot from years of relentless study, scanned the countless notes he had scribbled and stuck on the wall before him. I need to find a way to access the records and bring out Selene. Daniel's research's directions shifted, his focus narrowing. However, he didn't find any suitable lead even after 100 years. The world outside the confines of his study was changing. Countries crumbled, new organizations flourished, and yet, his search remained unfulfilled. The passage of time continued. It started to make Daniel nervous. I thought the records contained information about the apocalypse era and after because the records were created in the apocalypse era. But I don't see any indications of anyone making the records now. Was I wrong? The easiest way of bringing about Selene was to find the person who created the records and ask him to bring out Selene, who was within the records. There is no one who is creating a record. Daniel was sure the creator of the records was an Earthling. The clues were undeniable, because all knowledge in the records was related to Earth and its future. Another 100 years passed. Daniel's patience was at its limits. His study had grown into a fortress of knowledge, with entire wings dedicated to failed theories and fragmented clues. Left with no other choice, he decided to take the task upon himself. If no one is going to make the records, then I will have to do it. It was a borderline stupid thought. The records were an existence that had transcended time. Daniel would create it. But there was a reason Daniel thought he could do it. Pandora's box. He looked at the silver cube in his hands. One of its sides was opened. The cube was empty from the inside. The metallic surface seemed to absorb the dim light. Daniel had obtained the cube from Kronos. According to Kronos, this cube was what contained the apocalypse. It had unleashed the apocalypse on Earth when the cube was opened. Zeus had verified Kronos' statement, though he had been pissed quite a bit. Daniel had to make a deal with Kronos to get Pandora's box. If you can make the records, we will be able to access it at will, Kronos had said to Daniel. Take it. Maybe this cursed object will finally become a beacon of hope and progress for our world. Daniel's brows creased as he looked at the empty cube. I've verified the objects placed inside the cube can't be eroded by time. It's not exactly eternal as in the way the records are, existing in past, present, and future. But it's still eternal as in the objects can't be destroyed by time when they are inside the cube. He held the cube tighter. Now the only thing I need to put inside the cube is knowledge of the present and future, and it will become the records. After decades of struggle, Daniel had started to doubt himself. Could he actually save Neo? Was Selene still alive within the records? What if the records he created were not the records the children of Mana could access? Chapter 328 Saving Neo and Selene. Author's note. For those who are unaware, a chapter's price is determined by the chapter's length, not by author. Ellipsis. Daniel steeled his resolve. He wasn't going to give up. How do I put knowledge into this? Daniel's brows furrowed. He had to put information about the present and future into the cube. The records he would create were different from the records that existed and were used by children of Mana. Or maybe they were the same. Daniel didn't care which of the two it was. After he created his records, he planned to connect them with the existing records and bring out Celine through them. The plan is good, but how can I find all the information about the present and future to put into the cube? Daniel had an answer and a plan. It was just risky. His trait. He could see the future through it. Daniel met with Athena and looked into her future. The sensation of being in the future in his soul form was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. When his soul returned to his body, he used the transfer technique he had received from the system. Wisps of white energy traced along his fingertips. He took out the memories of the future he gained from Athena and placed them carefully inside the cube. The crystalline structure absorbed them, glowing brighter. He did the same with Emma, Zeus, Apollo, Kronos, Rhea, Perseus, Poseidon, Ares, Atlas. Not just awakeners. He looked into the future of anyone he could meet and poured the knowledge of future he gained through them into the cube. The process was excruciating. Repeatedly tearing apart his memories began to leave holes in Daniel's consciousness. Daniel ignored the pain. A twisted smile appeared on his face as the glow of the cube intensified. His plan was working. I just need more information. If I can put all the information of a specific time period, the memories will become self-sufficient and they should start generating future memories. Getting all information of a specific time period was the same as assembling every part of a car. If Daniel could do that, then his car would start working. That is, the memories would start interacting with each other and move forward, forming a simulated world inside the cube. To explain simply, Daniel needed to get all information about the world at, let's say, 4:30 p.m. At 4:30 p.m., he needed to know what was happening to everything. About the flowers outside his garden, swaying gently in the breeze. About the neighbor next door, humming as she watered the plants. About the monsters undersea, lurking in the ocean depths. He needed to have knowledge of each and every object present in the world at 4:30 p.m. Then, he would put all that information inside the cube. The world of memories within the cube would be no different from the real world for that moment at 4:30 p.m. After that, Daniel only needed to fuse those disjointed memories. When the memories combined, they would start interacting with each other. It was like putting two pre-programmed robots together and letting them talk. Since the memories were an exact replica of the real world, the interactions between them would show what would happen in the real world. If everything worked as planned, a simulated world would be created within the cube. Daniel started to see the issues with his plan as time passed. For one, he had to take a break every time he used his trait. Secondly, he couldn't see a specific time period's future. How far in the future he could see was not controllable. But to make the memories inside the cube self-sufficient, he had to put all information of at least one point in time. There was only one way to do it. He had to look into the future as many times as possible and keep doing it until he got all information of a specific point of time. The problem, in the end, is my own mana capacity. Daniel decided to ask for help from Moon. Of course, I would help a friend in need, the Moon's consciousness agreed readily. She promised to supply Daniel the energy needed to activate his trait non-stop. His pace of filling the information into the cube increased. The dim glow of the cube illuminated the darkened room as Daniel worked tirelessly. Shelves of books and scattered papers crowded the walls, filled with diagrams and notes on his work. He started to experience memory loss as he ripped his own memories to put them into the cube. It was painful. Many times, Daniel would wake up, not knowing who he was or what he was doing. He was starting to forget the faces of people he cared about. Why was he doing this? What was he trying to create? Daniel was forgetting everything. He continued to look into the future and take those memories from his head and put them into the cube. Even though his memories were disappearing, a voice remained inside his head. You can't stop. You have to save him. You promised. Daniel started to fear what was happening to him. It wouldn't take long for him to forget who he was and why he was trying to create the records. If that happened, he might not be able to save that man. The wealth of memories inside the cube had grown, but Daniel wasn't happy. The memories were far from becoming self-sufficient. At his current pace, it would take him thousands of years to create a simulated world inside the cube, if not more. He had to do better. He had to do it fast. Before he forgot why he was creating the records. This is the only way. Daniel decided to take a risk. He was in his soul form, and his soul was in the future of his neighbor. In that future, Daniel went to another person and used his trait on him. He tried to look into the future of a person he met inside the future. It allowed him to collect information of the future at a fast pace. His speed of collecting memories increased exponentially. The risks he had taken put immense burden on his mind. He withstood the burden with sheer will. Daniel had lived over 1,000 regressions. His mind was not so weak as to break as soon as it was under pressure. However, not everything could be withstood by will. Daniel was overexerting his trait. Traits were like muscles. Training them would make them stronger, but overdoing the training would harm the muscles' traits. Daniel started to lose his strength. He was growing weaker with every activation of his trait. Ironically, time did not allow his strength to grow, however, it let his strength regress. It was time's curse for going against it. Centuries passed in a blur. Daniel remained in his room as he looked into the future. Since he started to use his trait while he was in the future, he no longer had the need to find more people in the present to use his trait on. The once vibrant walls were now dulled with decay. Food, water, and recreation. Daniel forego everything. Mold started to creep up on his walls. The table in the corner of the room began to rot away. He never noticed those things. All of his focus was on one thing: completing the record. Days upon days passed. Daniel had long forgotten how many people's memories he had looked into. Why was he doing this? He couldn't remember anymore. The only reason he used his trait every day was the inner compulsion that told him to finish the records. Piece by piece, Daniel tore apart his own memories. Pain became a constant companion. It lingered in his chest like a dull ache that would never disappear. He started to lose himself. Who was he? Now, he could barely remember anyone. The only reminders of his life were the notes he left in his room, scattered across his worn wooden desk. He would read them every day. I'm Daniel Kylam, a regressor who has gone through countless loops. I'm a Grim Reaper too. I like jazz. Every day, he would learn who he was from the notes. Every night, he would forget who he was. Then, the day would start anew, and he would read the notes again. Sometimes, he would chuckle at his past self's actions. Sometimes, he would be disgusted. Piece by piece, he ripped his own existence to build the records. And finally, they were completed. The memories put into the cube connected. They started fusing, becoming a perfectly oiled machine, a perfect replica, which was no different from the real world. A smaller world, exactly the same as the real world, was born inside the Pandora's box. He had created the Akashic record. However, there was something more he had to do before the Akashic record could be considered completed. My friend, it has been centuries since we've met. I thought you had forgotten about me, Typhaon said with a smile. His bark-like features twisted gently, happy that Daniel finally contacted him. Hello, Daniel answered. The dim room felt colder as he looked at the tree-like humanoid monster. He didn't know who Typhaon was. The reason he had called Typhaon was the notes in the room. Ask for Typhaon's help after you finish creating a simulated world, a note had said. Typhaon's face froze when he noticed Daniel's expression. His features shifted, the wood-like skin tightening as his smile faded. He hated seeing a friend in pain. The blame weighed heavily on him. If only he had not asked about the red-eyed swordsman, Daniel would not have gone to the erased timeline, and he would not have started his quest to save that man. Daniel, unable to understand the cause of Typhaon's fury, explained why he had called him. You are saying I need to connect this Akashic record with the world core? Typhaon asked. Yes, the existing records that children of Mana can access are stored within the world. That's why children of Mana think the information is given to them by the world. We need to store the Akashic record I've created inside the world core. In there, both records will connect, and I will gain access to the original records where Selena, the child of Mana we are trying to save, is through my records, Daniel explained. Connecting records wasn't simple. The original records were transcendental existences. They existed in past, present, and future. But they didn't exist at the same time. After all, they had not been created yet. By now, Daniel understood he was the creator of the original records. His records would evolve in future, and become truly eternal. For now, connecting both records would fuse them and allow the original records to manifest into the present, not just exist as abstract concepts. The original records only existed in the present and thus couldn't be accessed by anyone but children of Mana. After the manifestation, everyone would be able to connect to the records. Typhaon continued to stare at Daniel instead of doing anything. Daniel misunderstood his gaze and clarified. Don't worry. I've read the notes, and I know I had a deal with the Awakeners to allow them access to records. I've made arrangements for it, Daniel said. He had given different levels of access depending on the qualifications of the Awakeners. Nobody can edit or make the records, though, Daniel explained. The simulated world is delicate. If a foreign existence makes changes in it, the simulated world will start predicting the wrong future. It's like injecting foreign objects into a controlled system. When that happens, the records will become useless, and they won't give us any correct information. The records contained a simulated world. The simulated world allowed anyone to see what would happen in the future through the ongoing simulation within the cube. However, the records would become corrupted if even a slight change was made. As long as no change was made, they would mirror the real world and show the present and future. I'm not asking about that. I want to know if you are happy, Typhaon said softly. Quote. Daniel couldn't answer. He had finally created the record. But he no longer remembered why he was doing it. The notes he had written told him it was to save a man. However, Daniel didn't feel anything anymore. Or so he believed. Forget I said anything. Let's complete the record. Typhaon spoke up, his voice gentler this time. He took the cube and closed his eyes. Divine energy began to fluctuate around Typhaon. While Daniel had been busy creating the records, the world had ascended, and a few awakeners had become gods. Mana had transformed into divine energy. Typhaon concentrated on fusing the Akashic record into the world core. Daniel's heart started to beat faster without realizing it. What if all the theories he had built were wrong? What if his records were not a perfectly simulated world and they predicted the wrong future? The more he thought, the more fear crept into Daniel's heart. It was cold and consuming. His trait could not see paradox timelines perfectly. It made paradox timelines were hard to integrate into the simulated world. What if there were some paradox timelines he hadn't accounted for? That would ended up ruining his simulated world. His breathing became heavy with fear. The dim room seemed to close in around him. For others, Daniel had been creating the records for centuries. But only he knew he had been doing it for far longer. He had seen millions, perhaps billions of years, worth of future. Even if he couldn't remember those futures anymore after he put the memories into the cube, the exhaustion and pain he spent building the record were crystal clear to him. Just the thought of failure was enough to make him shiver uncontrollably. If he failed. Ding. A sound echoed in the silence. Words materialized before him, glowing faintly in the air. Synchronization complete. Registering user. User. Daniel Kylam. Registered in Akashic record. Daniel stared at the screen, stunned. He couldn't describe how he felt. This screen is the proof that records have fused and they are giving access to everyone, he muttered in a daze. The hard work of countless years had borne fruit. Just then, he heard a voice he thought he had long forgotten. Brother. Typhaon and Daniel both heard Celine's voice. The room seemed to brighten as the cube pulsed with a soothing rhythm. It works, Typhaon said. You've succeeded, my friend. The smile on Typhaon's face only grew wider when he noticed Daniel's expression. Tears were falling out of Daniel's eyes, reflecting the gentle light of the cube. Why am I crying? Because you've saved them both. Typhaon hugged Daniel while laughing loudly. The warmth of his embrace contrasted with the cold, dimly lit room. The cube in Daniel's hands pulsed gently with a soft, ethereal glow. Daniel couldn't stop his tears. They streamed down his face, warm and relentless. Typhaon was right. He had saved them both. His sister and the man whose name and face he could no longer recall. I did it. Even though he could no longer remember why he had started walking on this journey. Even though he had gone through struggles for countless years. Daniel felt it was all worth it. The air around him seemed lighter, as if a great burden had finally lifted. His heart was filled with happiness and relief. I saved them. Chapter 329 Typhaon's Warning. Typhaon helped Daniel sit on the chair. The seat creaked as Daniel slumped back, utterly exhausted. His body had given out after he finally relaxed. The dim light from the cube illuminated his pale face, streaked with tears that he wiped away while laughing softly. I'm fine now. We should go and meet the leaders of the Awakeners, Daniel said. Is it about giving them exclusive access to the Akashic records? Typhaon asked. Yes. I couldn't build the exclusive access before since it is complicated. But now that I've completed the records, I have free time. I can make them exclusive access like they wanted, Daniel explained. Typhaon's brows furrowed. Daniel's condition was clearly at the verge of a breakdown. No need for that now. The leaders of the Awakeners said you can do it at your own pace, Typhaon reassured him gently, placing a hand on Daniel's shoulder. Huh, really? Indeed, it is true. That's nice. I guess I can finally take a vacation. Daniel was looking forward to talking with Celine too. The warmth in his chest contrasted the ache of his fatigued body. Suddenly, Typhaon raised his head. His eyes narrowed as he sensed an approaching presence beyond the wooden door. He turned back to Daniel. I've built an academy around your house. Demigod Academy. Since I don't have an identity, being a monster, I used your identity for it. Think of the academy as your home and use it for your vacations, Typhaon explained in a gentle voice. Vacation in an academy. Ha ha ha. Don't worry. There is a nice resort with a lakeside view. There's even a burning mountain range and a sky rock island if you want to go on a tour. How big is that place? Daniel's mouth parted slightly. Big enough for you to enjoy to your heart's content. The academy was Typhaon's way of repenting for his mistakes. It would become a sanctuary and a training ground, raising heroes who would one day protect and save the world. But more importantly, it was a home he built solely for Daniel. A home where he could rest. From today, you are the headmaster of this place, Typhaon said. Isn't that your job? Daniel questioned. I've spent a bit too much time in the world of the living. It was time I returned to the underworld. Making you the headmaster is my way of getting the job here off my back, Typhaon chuckled. He could feel the presence that stood just outside the door, growing impatient. Daniel was unaware of it and Typhaon intended to keep it that way. Before Daniel could say anything, Typhaon spoke up again, his expression softening. You should rest and talk with Celine. I will come back after some time. Okay. Typhaon left the room. Outside was the hallway. He found Zeus standing there, arms crossed. A faint crackle of electricity trailed along his fingertips. The two stared at each other. I saw the status screen, Zeus said, his voice as commanding as ever. Good to know it is working as intended, Typhaon answered. Can I meet Daniel? Zeus asked. Why? I'm here to request privileged access to the records for the top-rank Awakeners and gods. It will help us. Daniel has implemented a system in the records that increases your access level depending on your qualification. Use it instead of asking for privileged access, Typhaon said, recalling Daniel's detailed explanation from earlier. Zeus frowned upon getting cut off mid-sentence. We can get the techniques of the future from the records. It's important for us. Those techniques are needed if we want to protect the world. Typhaon's gaze darkened as he stepped closer. Who is we here? Typhaon recalled the broken state Daniel had been in. He blamed himself for pushing Daniel down that path. But not again. Daniel has done his part. Please allow him to retire and rest. Rest. The world needs him. He has saved the world twice already. He has no obligation to sacrifice himself more for the world. Saved from you, didn't he? Zeus taunted. When he got no response from Typhaon, he took a step forward. He intended to go past Typhaon and meet Daniel directly. Typhaon raised his hand and stopped Zeus from taking another step. If you take another step, Typhaon said in a low but threatening voice, I'll make you need to save the world a third time. Is that a threat? Zeus's voice was icy cold. That depends on where your foot lands. Zeus glared at Typhaon. Stop being selfish. Daniel has gained the power to change the world. Gained. A terrifying pressure erupted from Typhaon. The floor cracked beneath his feet. He has gained power. The air trembled as Typhaon's fury grew. Daniel sacrificed everything to create the record. That man no longer remembers who he is. He wept tears of joy without knowing why he was happy. Don't insult his suffering by saying he gained power. Zeus felt the weight of those words. For the briefest moment, his gaze faltered. He lost everything while saving the world twice, Typhaon continued. Twice, he saved this damned place. Let him rest. He has no duty to save it again or help it anymore. He had done more than enough. Zeus clenched his jaw. The truth in Typhaon's words was undeniable. But, move, he commanded, or I'll make you move. Typhaon's eyes narrowed. The brat who used to tremble at the mere mention of my name thinks he can make me move. He let out a savage grin, revealing jagged teeth formed from bark and stone. Try it. A heartbeat passed. No one moved. The air crackled with suppressed tension. Zeus opened his mouth to speak but stopped when a voice echoed in his mind. Return. Gaia voice resonated. I need to meet Daniel first, Zeus thought back. No. Gaia's voice echoed again. Leave this be. Typhaon is right. He has earned his peace. You don't need to worry. I can overpower Daniel with force easily if he refuses. The moon is moving. Gaia's words made Zeus freeze. Moon. Why is she moving now? You know why. She warned us against making Daniel work unless he approaches us first. Zeus clenched his fists. What if we don't listen to her? Zeus asked. Zeus. Gaia. There are millions of humans living on Earth, Zeus interrupted her. He continued. Not everyone is happy to be alive, but everyone is trying. Just one guy's involvement can ease their suffering. And he is saying he doesn't want to work. We aren't in the wrong by forcing him to. Daniel is a grim reaper too. Typhaon's voice cut through the telepathic conversation like a blade. His towering, tree-like figure loomed in the hallway as he looked down on Zeus. Touch him, and you will have war with the underworld. The temperature seemed to drop. The presence of death and darkness flared around Typhaon, as if proving his threat. Zeus fell silent. The threat was not just words. Typhaon alone would have been a problem. Adding the moon to the equation was already pushing the boundaries of what the association could handle. But if the underworld became involved, they had no chance. Zeus gritted his teeth but took a step back. For now. Chapter 330 Leaving Shadow World. Present. Neo stood at the edge of the crumbling world. He watched the spot where young Daniel had vanished. You think he can do it? Neo asked. I don't know, but I won't have my hopes up, the angel replied. Neo's lips curled into a faint smirk. Then shall we make a bet? If he succeeds, you'll listen to me when I return to my world. If you win the bet, well, I don't think you need a reward for that scenario, Neo added, folding his arms. Fine. Let's make the bet, the angel said. Neo wasn't worried Velkaria would break the verbal promise. The angel noticed Neo's trust in Daniel and asked. You trust him a lot? Yes, I do. Neo had watched over Daniel for thousands of years. He knew Daniel enough to know Daniel would not stop until he had found a way. The man was stubborn to a fault. Well, we should leave this place, or we will get erased by time, Neo said, looking at the crumbling world around them. He raised his head and looked at the sky. I want to leave the shadow trial. A door made of shadows appeared in front of his eyes as soon as he completed his words. The black frame twisted and rippled as if made of living ink. The angel frowned, glancing at the narrow entryway. How will I fit through that door? You don't need to worry about that. Neo's shadow stirred. It began to stretch. The tendrils of blackness unfurled across the broken ground. Mountains, destroyed cities, dried lakes, all were engulfed as the shadows expanded. His shadows never stopped. They continued to spread wide, devouring continents, oceans, and finally the entire Earth. The angel blinked as it found itself standing within Neo's shadow space. An endless expanse of black stretched out in every direction. How large is his shadow space? The angel muttered. It was surprised by Neo's mastery of the shadow element. Just then, Neo opened the shadow space's entrance slightly. How is it in there? I can adjust. There was a short silence before the angel spoke again. I thought you gave away masteries of your elements. But judging by the size of the shadow space, you are already at expert mastery. I did give it away, but I've gained quite a bit back already. The angel did not know how to react to that answer. It consoled itself by thinking Neo had always been a freak of nature. Neo floated in the empty space. He extended his hand, summoning a shadow bird with wings as vast as the horizon. Its feathers shimmered like onyx, reflecting no light. He gestured, and the bird lowered itself, allowing him to climb onto its back. Take me to the door. The shadow bird glided toward the door of shadows. Only pitch black darkness existed beyond its frame. Neo felt a shift. When he opened his eyes, he was standing in a vast void. The floor that had a checkered pattern, black and white squares extending infinitely beneath his feet. A human-sized doll stood before him. She bowed. Welcome back, Neo Hargraves. I'm a number 22, a gatekeeper of the world of treacherous shadows, the doll said. You are the same gatekeeper who welcomed me when I came to this world, Neo replied. A number 22 was surprised. She had not expected him to remember her name after meeting only once. Indeed, we've met before, she said while stopping the surprise from showing on her face. Congratulations on completing your shadow trial. Daniel saved the child of Mana. Neo asked. He did, and as he was your proxy, the rescue is counted to be completed by you too. A faint smile appeared on Neo's face. He sent his intent inside his shadow space and told the angel what was happening. The angel couldn't reply back since the voice didn't travel between the shadow spaces inside and the outside. And the angel didn't know how to use intent to talk like Neo. Neo believed the angel was happy. What about Jack? Where is he? Neo asked as he looked around. He is meeting another gatekeeper, a number 22 answered. Her words meant only a few seconds had passed for Jack while Neo had lived through thousands of years. How is he? He has lost his rank. I'm asking about his emotional state. He wants to kill himself, but he doesn't want to waste the life you protected by sacrificing yourself. A number 22 didn't mince her words. Neo smiled bitterly. He had to complete his job here and meet with Jack quickly. Then, he would tell him everything was fine. Shall we discuss your rewards? Wait a second. Neo unleashed his world energy. The space vibrated around him, rippling with an intense aura as he used it to activate the third stage of his blessing. The world energy condensed and formed his very being. Bones, muscles, organs, nerves, blue blood. Everything regrew. Neo kept his soul within his body and fused them both. It was a complete resurrection. With partial third stage blessing, Neo could regenerate his body parts but not fuse his soul and body. This limitation was why the blessing could not resurrect him fully before. The problem was solved when he could finally use the full power of the third stage of his blessing. Neo looked down, noticing his body covered in scars and his long hair cascading over his shoulders and back. The dim light of the void reflected faintly on his pale skin. He used his shadow affinity and used the shadow robe spell. The shadows wrapped around him to form rudimentary clothing of dark, flowing fabric. As for his hair, he let it fall freely behind his back. He wore clothes first as he was worried he might forget about them. The memory of Professor Daniel's horrified stare remained in his mind. The professor had looked at Neo as if he was staring at a monster, not a human. About my reward, I want to take whatever is in my shadow space to the real world. No. A #22 swift word made Neo frown. Is it because I'm taking the sacred treasure out? Neo didn't hide his intentions. He admitted openly he was taking the Zeus corpse along with the angel and the destroyed earth. The gatekeeper and the supreme deity of shadows would surely know about it. You are misunderstanding us. We are not saying you can't take them. A number 22 continued. Taking anything out from the world of treacherous shadows is a gray area in the rules. Normally, we allow the champions to take the items from the world of treacherous shadows if their performance is exceptional. If the performance they have shown is anything below excellent, we allow them to take items from the world of treacherous shadows only as their rewards, a number 22 explained. So, Neo's words trailed off. According to what a number 22 said, he seemed to have shown an exceptional performance in his shadow trail. After all, he managed to complete the trail after failing it. Indeed, you are thinking correctly. A number 22 smiled. She added, the supreme deity of shadows has been impressed by your will, valor, and wits. He has allowed you to take the items without any price. The gatekeeper did not explain how the reward Neo got before was not a reward. She knew Neo understood what was happening. Chapter 331 Reward of the Shadow Trial. What do you want as the reward, Neo Hargraves? A number 22 asked again. Neo didn't answer immediately. He could ask for anything. Power, wealth, status. The supreme deity of shadows would give him anything. Among the three, what was it that Neo wanted? Neo thought back to his goal. Apex. He wanted to reach the zenith and be the strongest there was. His goal had never changed. Should he ask for strength from the supreme deity? Neo shook his head. He would not feel satisfied, even if he became the strongest, if that strength came from somebody else. Sure, the strength granted to him would be a reward of the shadow trial. But it was granted. What I want is. Neo had always chased after ultimate strength. But what was ultimate strength? Gods. They were rulers of planets. They could control the lives of billions with ease. But they had their limits. They were bound to the world. Without the world, they were nothing. It was why Valkyria defeated Earth so easily. The angel had targeted the world core of Earth, and there was nothing anyone could do. They conquered planets. Then, were the symbol of ultimate strength the outer gods. They conquered planets. They ravaged worlds with ease. However, Neo knew. Outer gods were far from the strongest. Valkyria had tried to collect Earth's sacred treasure. If Neo had to guess, the reason outer gods invaded other planets was related to sacred treasures. The outer gods wouldn't have needed to collect sacred treasures if they were the strongest. The strongest beings needed not to do anything. Just like the supreme deity of shadows. Neo looked at a number 22 before he turned to the empty sky. The void above was endless. It seemed to hide something greater beyond. He must be there. I want to see what true strength looks like. Neo wanted to see what the end of his goal looked like. He wanted to see the zenith. Mindlessly chasing after strength was useless if he did not know what he was aiming for. Neo Hargraves, a number 22, called out. The doll's facial expression remained neutral. Yet Neo could sense the suppressed wrath in her voice. Your performance was exceptional. No, it was beyond exceptional, it was a masterpiece. But, don't overstep your boundaries. Her voice stabbed into Neo's soul like a sharp blade. He clenched his jaw, feeling the pain. Your existence is far weaker than the Supreme's divine self. A glance can kill you, and your skills won't be able to protect you. She talked as if she was trying to protect Neo by stopping him from seeing Shadow Supreme's true self. However, Neo knew. She felt it was beneath Supreme's prestige to be looked upon by someone as weak as him. I've said what I want as a reward. Even if it kills you. I've made my choice. Neo might have been immortal, but the gap between him and Supreme Deity was too enormous. His immortality might not save him. Even if a fish can breathe underwater, if it goes too deep, the water would crush it to death, Neo Hargraves, a number 22, warned. You are that fish. A carp. Just because your death makes you immortal doesn't mean you can't die. Even the lofty gods of Earth were no different than bugs in front of the Supreme Deity of Shadows. Neo Hargraves. The gatekeeper stopped speaking. It looked above. If that is what you wish, O Supreme. She bowed and lowered her gaze. Neo kept his eyes on the sky. He felt as if someone there was chuckling. Suddenly, he heard a voice. Fine. His ears burst. His skin started to crack, and his blood vessels ruptured. He felt as if his bones were being crushed from within. A single word carried power to kill him. I will allow you to look at me. A ginormous entity began to appear in the sky. Black tendrils of ink writhed around it as if shielding its body. Its enormous horns seemed to pierce the heavens themselves. The monster's presence was terrifying. Neo's eyes burst from the strain. He used his intent to see the Supreme Deity of Shadows. The figure looked down upon him with an overwhelming gaze. It seemed to be unfathomably large. Neo did not say it, but something told him the entity was larger than the universe. He used his death to delay the pull of death. It was useless. His body was being crushed under the overwhelming presence of the Shadow Supreme. He activated the third stage of his blessing, along with life and holy elements to heal himself. Nothing seemed able to stop the destruction of his body. Suddenly, Neo's expression twisted. A look of anger appeared on his face. Don't joke with me. His lungs were crushed. He used intent to speak. I said show me your true self, not this damned monster. If I die, I die. I don't need your consideration. The monster in the sky smiled. A soft laughter echoed through the void. Very well. The pressure surrounding Neo increased a hundredfold. His soul and seed of existence began to crack. The true body of the Supreme Deity of Shadows began to manifest. Wisps of black ink floated around, shifting and distorting the surrounding void. The ink twisted and transformed into different objects. One moment, it was a human figure, the next a jagged rock, and then an orb of swirling energy. The body was not just giant. Its weight of existence seemed to crush the fabric of reality itself. The gap of dimension where Neo and a number 22 stood began to fracture, and cracks formed in the endless void. Neo stopped delaying his death. He knew it was useless. Instead, he directed his entire focus toward the Supreme Deity of Shadows. Only one word came to his mind when he looked at the Supreme Being. Totality. The Shadow Supreme seemed to mirror every object in existence. His ever-shifting form continued to transform. The black ink flowed with perfect fluidity, morphing into massive horns, then blades, then symbols. Neo felt as if he was witnessing the entire universe reflected in that form at once. His body, soul, and seed of existence were shattering. Yet he smiled. This is what true power looks like. As his body crumbled away, he reached his arm toward the endless sky. Today, he gained a goal. The being in the sky. The Supreme Deity of Shadows. Neo would surpass him. His body and soul shattered into fragments. The gatekeeper A-22's expression shifted. Her eyes widened in shock as Neo's seed of existence did not completely vanish. Faint, radiant light continued to flicker within it. Eternal was protecting him. What? A number 22 muttered. She glanced up at the vast figure in the sky. Oh Supreme, did you hold back to make sure he survived? My A number 22, do you believe me to a fraud? That I would lie about giving a reward and give an incomplete reward instead. I apologize, oh Supreme. I dare not doubt you. A number 22 lowered her head. The Supreme Deity chuckled. It was normal for a number 22 to think he had held back from manifesting his true body. But he had not held back at all. A number 22, you seem to have forgotten who he is. His voice caused countless worlds that existed outside the gaps of dimension to shatter like fragile glass. For an instant, reality itself trembled. The supreme deity of shadows shifted his gaze and looked at the broken worlds. He restored them with a mere thought. The fragments of the broke world seamlessly merged back together. As if nothing had happened. No one in those worlds realized they had been killed and brought back. The supreme deity turned his gaze from the restored worlds toward a number 22. He is not a carp or a fish. The supreme deity raised his hand. Black ink writhed around his fingers, grabbing the ginormous monster Neo had first seen when he asked to see Shadow Supreme. With a simple gesture, the Supreme condensed the monster into a sphere of ink. Shadows shifted within the sphere like an abyss. He is a dragon. A heavenbreaker. That's who he is. The ball of ink descended, floating gently above a #22's hand. The supreme deity's colossal form began to dissolve, retreating from the gap of dimension and allowing the void to stabilize once more. The gatekeeper stared at the orb of ink. She knew why the supreme deity gave it to her. He wanted to give the sphere he had created to Neo. The orb was crafted from a part of the Supreme's true body. It contained enormous power. The sphere of ink was a reward that countless beings would kill for. There was only one reason why Shadow's Supreme gave it to Neo even though he never asked for it. He had earned it. Chapter 332 Damned Shadows. The gatekeeper knew Neo would refuse the reward. He was a stubborn person who would never change his stance once he formed it. A number 22 commanded the orb of ink. It floated towards Neo's seed of existence and fused into it. You've earned it, Neo Hargraves. Surviving after taking a look at a supreme deity was no simple feat. The surrounding empty expanse pulsed gently. Time remaining. 11 hours, 59 minutes. Time remaining. 11 hours, 2. Time remaining. 7. Time T. 12 hours have passed since your death. You will be forcefully revived. Neo's body and soul regenerated. He was brought back to life with a gasp. His chest rose sharply as cold air filled his lungs. Pain echoed through his nerves. Damn it, this always makes me feel like shit, he said with a smile. Neo was happy despite his words. He had received a goal as a reward. Just then, Neo sensed something different about himself. His brows furrowed. Before he could check what it was, he heard a number 22. We apologize for calling you weak, Neo Hargraves, a number 22 said, even though she had never called him weak out aloud. Neo nodded. Honestly, he didn't think a number 22 was wrong after he saw the supreme deity of shadows. The Shadow Supreme's body continued to transform from one object to another, shifting from vast celestial formations to minute fragments of cosmic dust. It allowed Neo to look at the wonders of the universe. Some of them were weak, but rare, while some were absolute and powerful. He realized he had a long path before he could reach Zenith. Now that I've gotten my reward. Neo suddenly stopped speaking. He blinked. He tried to blink. He realized he was seeing things through intent vision after he was revived. What the? Neo waved his hands in front of his eyes. Nothing. He could see nothing. A glance at the Shadow Supreme had turned him blind. He tried to use his blessing along with life and holy element. Nothing changed. There was not the slightest hint of his eyes recovering. Neo exhaled, surprised. Unlike his scars, which he could heal given time, he had no idea if he could heal his eyes. Neo felt it. Shadow Supreme could have killed him with a thought. He only survived as the Shadow Supreme had no intention of harming him. Do not be surprised, Neo Hargraves. It is a small injury for what you've tried, a number 22 said. Neo nodded. Can I meet up with Jack before I leave for my world? The loss of vision wasn't anything big. His intent vision was much better than physical vision. You can. Jack and Neo existed in different pockets inside the gap of dimensions. The gatekeeper was about to fuse both pockets and bring Neo and Jack into one space. Neo suddenly spoke up. Will Jack get a reward for the trial? He will not. A number 22 answered without hesitation. The trial was not just saving the child of Mana. It was the test of your willpower. You stayed in the shadow world for centuries to save your home. But Jack was here, weeping. Her voice was cold and detached. We do not blame him for having left the shadow trial, but he could have done better. He should have done better, the gatekeeper said. I was the one who forced him to leave, Neo replied. It does not matter to us. This is a trial, not a charity. Neo clicked his tongue. He wanted to see if he could negotiate and make them help Jack return to his previous strength. It seemed impossible. The gatekeeper brought her palms together before turning them in opposite directions. Neo felt a shift. He began to hear a sobbing sound next to him. He turned around, noticing Jack on his knees, crying. Another gatekeeper, J number 48, stood in front of Jack. She noticed a number 22 had shifted the space and taken over her job. J number 48 left after giving a nod to A number 22. A number 22 also disappeared for a short while, giving Neo and Jack some space. Hey, Neo called out. Jack flinched. He raised his head slowly and looked at Neo. Why you? Don't tell me you don't recognize me. Dude, sure I have some scars, but my face is more or less intact, Neo joked. Physical appearance was the last thing one would think of after looking at him. His presence had grown considerably since he last met Jack. Ahaha. Jack covered his face with trembling hands. The shadows around him seemed to pulse with his despair. A look of helplessness appeared in his eyes. This darkness is starting to take over my mind. Ahahaha. I'm seeing hallucinations. Hey, you fucking bitch. Neo crouched. He looked Jack in the eye. After you left, I activated the world time spell. Then, the world went back in time. I helped other awakeners grow quickly before the end of the world arrived. They were people who would become gods. There is no need to say how great their talent and potential is. With my guidance, they grew stronger far faster than our timeline and we were able to save the world, Neo explained. There was no need to reveal the truth. Telling Jack how much Neo suffered would only make Jack more miserable. You are not a hallucination. I just told you what happened. If that is not enough for you to believe me, I can always slap the shit out of you. The pain will help, if my words don't. Jack froze. The light in his eyes seemed to flicker as he opened his mouth slowly. It's really you. Only Neo can make such bad jokes. Can I hit you just once? Before the duo could talk more, a number 22 returned. You have been entertained in this place for enough time. Please return and converse in your own world. Sure. Neo stood up. He turned to Jack, who, still unsure if everything was truly happening, returned to his feet. Jack's complexion improved, but not by much. Neo had survived, so did their world, but it did not mean Jack's incompetence changed. Your family name is still Hanma, Neo said, reading Jack's intent. I changed the timeline, and Emma never met you. I wonder if she later met a guy whose family name was Hanma or if there is another reason. What are you trying to say? Jack asked. Nothing. Just wondering aloud. Neo shrugged. His words were meant to give a goal to Jack. Jack was in a dangerous mental state right now. Neo worried if he did not give Jack another thing to focus on, the thing that happened with Kane would repeat with Jack. Jack would give up on living. A number 22 created a portal for them. The shimmering circle of energy radiated a soft hum. You can leave through this. Neo and Jack stepped towards the portal. Neo stopped just before entering and turned back to A number 22. Can I ask you something? You can, but we cannot guarantee you will receive an answer. Who saved the child of Mana in the original timeline? We apologize, as we cannot answer your question. Neo nodded. He had expected it. I wonder if Kronos and Zeus somehow managed to upgrade the world time spell and make it work with corrupted time elementals, then they asked for Daniel's help. Or if my current actions are what makes the original timeline. He pursed his lips. I guess I'll never know. With a chuckle, he stepped into the portal. It was time he returned to home. Chapter 333 Crack in the High Sky. Library, Demigod Academy, World of the Living, Earth Dimension. Present. The library's massive oak doors slammed open. Felix burst in with ragged breathing. Her face was flushed, and strands of damp hair clung to her skin. Arthur and Mars were seated at a long wooden table near the center, surrounded by dozens of books. Arthur had an old spell book open before him, while Mars scribbled notes furiously on paper. Morgan was swinging back on a chair near the corner. She munched on a crumpled bag of chips. Crumbs littered her lap. Clara, on the other hand, was fast asleep. Her head rested on an open book. Sean was nowhere in sight. He was likely going through the shelves deeper in the library, searching for reference materials. The Labarbi allowed them entry late at night thanks to Arthur and Felix being in top 10. They were all preparing, studying relentlessly, for their upcoming battle against Neo. Arthur and Mars exchanged concerned glances when they noticed Felix's disheveled state. What happened? There, huff, huff, is bad news. Felix cut him off, still panting. Sweat trickled down her temple, and her voice trembled as she spoke between ragged breaths. A huff. Dragon-ranked crack. Huff. Appeared in Auburn. What? Arthur and Mars both shot to their feet. Their eyes widened in alarm. Morgan, though slower to react, raised a curious brow, still chewing. Cracks, dimensional fractures, when expanded could form a massive wormhole, linking Earth to various elemental worlds. These massive cracks were known as windows. The cracks that connected Earth to non-elemental worlds were instead called portals. Arthur's mind raced as he rushed to Felix's side, gently guiding her to sit. He offered her a glass of water from the desk. "Are you sure it's in Auburn?" he asked after she had calmed down. Felix gulped down the water. She nodded, still breathless. "Yes, Auburn. That's the country where Jack's parents live in. The country where Jack and Neo entered into the shadow world," Morgan completed her words. She licked the salt from her lips and added, "Henry said Jack and Neo entered shadow window number 2C498. The window appeared a few weeks ago near Salavara City in Auburn Country. Considering the timing of the dragon-ranked crack's appearance, it was highly likely it was created due to the return of Neo and Jack. They would arrive when the crack transformed into a window. However, I don't think it's Neo," Arthur said. "It's almost impossible to clear Shadow Trail in less than a week, whatever it may be. Not to mention, Neo was mythic rank when they entered the trail. A tiger-ranked crack would form due to their appearance, not a dragon-ranked one," Arthur explained. "It's real," Mars interrupted. He showed his device to everyone. A hologram sprang up. The news reporter in the hologram delivered news at a rapid-fire pace. "A dragon-ranked crack has appeared in Auburn. The whole country is under emergency evacuation orders. Temple of Wind and Temple of Space have entered the scene. They are helping with the evacuation. The people's morale is at an all-time low. No matter what appears from the crack, it is a given that the Auburn country will soon face catastrophic damage." The news reporter stopped speaking. She ran up to a green-haired woman who was overseeing the evacuation. "Miss Everly, I've heard you are the leader of the current evacuation operation. Is it possible to evacuate the entire country before the cracks transform into a window or a portal? We will evacuate everyone safely and on time. Please do not worry." Senora Everly, the 17th disciple of Senator Sir Nicholas Montague, smiled. She knew the reporter was going live. If she said the truth, it was impossible to evacuate 500 million people within a few hours. It would create chaos. The ongoing panic was bad enough as it was. Senora didn't want to make it worse. She looked at the sky. There, a crack, larger than 3 cities combined, was festering. It was growing larger at a slow but steady pace. A team member of Senora's team approached. "Miss Senora." The team member approached her. He hesitated to speak, glancing at the reporter. Senora noticed his gaze and opened her mouth. "Speak. We've identified the crack's origin." The team member hesitated again. He didn't want to reveal the information on the news. Seeing him like this, Senora frowned. There were 3 situations that could appear when a crack appeared. Depending on the situation, the country could be evacuated successfully, the country could be wiped out with some damage to human resources, or the entire country along with its population could be annihilated. That's how dangerous a dragon-ranked crack was. Looks like it's the worst-case scenario, Senora thought. A wandering god is coming. The first situation was where a crack turned into a window. Windows spew monsters out into the real world, and they contaminate the real world, pulling it part by part into the elemental world. The contamination stops when the window is closed. This situation was the easiest to handle. It would give them enough time for evacuations. The second situation would be the crack transforming into a portal. It would connect to a planet filled with monsters or where civilizations existed. If a civilization existed, there was a very high chance of a war breaking out as soon as the portal formed. Senora was confident they could defeat whatever alien armies would come. However, the Auburn country would be destroyed in the aftermath. The worst is always the third one. Wanderers from elemental worlds. A lot of people entered elemental worlds for riches and precious resources. Quite a few of them died. It was normal for someone to get trapped and lost in elemental worlds. In such scenarios, most people would die. Only the strongest could survive elemental worlds. If the people lost in elemental worlds found a way to leave, they would often end up on random planets or cosmos. When such aliens ended up on Earth, they were called wanderers. Chapter 334 Wandering Gods. When such aliens ended up on Earth, they were called wanderers. To explain how strong a wanderer was, a single wanderer of a dragon-ranked window was as strong as the entire combined armies that would come out of a dragon-ranked portal. Needless to say, wanderers were, more often than not, gods of other worlds. Sorry, from here on it's confidential information. You can't record it, Senora told the reporter. The reporter hesitated. Mars, Felix, and Arthur frowned as they saw on the news how worried Senora's team member looked. If it's a dragon-ranked window, I guess it's not Neo, Mars muttered. But the timing. Felix's words trailed off. Arthur was worried too. His attention was shifted to the reaction of Senora's team member in the news. It's the worst-case scenario. A wanderer, probably someone who has reached one-stage god, is coming through the crack. Huh. Felix turned to him. So it can't be Neo. I think so, yes. Felix deflated like a balloon. She was relieved it wasn't Neo. After all, something must have gone wrong if Neo, who was mythic rank, was coming from a dragon-ranked crack. I guess we can relax, Felix said. Quote ellipsis dot question mark quote. Arthur tilted his head. I just said a one-stage god is coming. Why are you so relaxed? Shouldn't we worry? Oh, I guess there is something that even Sir Arthur doesn't know. Felix grinned when she noticed Arthur's confusion. She took out a pair of glasses from her pocket. Arthur had no idea why she had glasses with her, and wore them. She let out a fake, wise cough before she explained. What I'm about to tell you is an open secret among god clans. This isn't the first time a god or an angel has come to our world. We can take care of them just fine, albeit some damage is inevitable. Felix continued while mimicking Professor Angela's lecturing voice. A single paragon demigod is as strong as a one-stage god. Temple of Space and Temple of Wind have gone to Auburn to handle the crack. They must have at least 5 paragons. A god or two can be handled easily. Mars nodded behind her. Their world would have fallen long ago if they could not handle a god by themselves. It wasn't just once or twice that a wandering god ended up on Earth and tried to take over Earth and make it their own. Arthur frowned. The wooden desk creaked as he leaned on it. I know a paragon is as strong as a one-stage god, but you can't kill a god unless you are a god or an angel yourself. The paragons are neither. How will they win? Quote ellipsis question mark quote. Felix blinked, confused. What are you talking about? Who told you that? It isn't true. Arthur's frown became worse. The god clans seemed to have told their descendants a paragon was as strong as a one-stone stage god. But not that a paragon could never kill an angel or a god. Huh. Wait a second. Arthur's face stiffened. Felix, what happens to the wandering gods who are killed? He asked cautiously. I don't know. Why would I care about those who are killed? Arthur understood one thing after hearing her. They are keeping the wandering gods trapped somewhere. Grandpa told me our gods would never interfere with our world. That means we have no way to kill a god. But we can still defeat gods and capture them, just not kill them. If we had imprisoned the wandering gods, everyone would have known about it since it's big news. But the public doesn't seem to know. What are these guys doing with the captured wandering gods? Arthur's thoughts were cut short when Morgan spoke up suddenly. It might be Neo. Huh, Arthur said. Why do you think so? Look at the news. Everyone turned to the floating hologram screen. The crack had grown gigantic, pulsating ominously. It was about to complete its transformation. Shadows twisted along the edges of the breach as an unnatural wind seemed to blow from within. It's a shadow window, and judging by how the Templars on scene are nervous, it seems a wanderer is coming. A wanderer from the world of treacherous shadows. Isn't that Neo and Jack? Morgan said. But the ranks are too far apart, Mars countered. Maybe Neo and Jack asked to receive strength as their reward of Shadow Trail, or maybe something else happened. Morgan continued. It's too much of a coincidence that the Wanderer is coming from a shadow world and it's in the same country where Neo and Jack entered the shadow window. It has to be them. Felix's relaxed expression disappeared, replaced by newfound worry. She looked at the Templars ready to attack whoever came out of the crack. Some of them were paragons. A paragon was as strong as one stage god. They could snap a non-ascended world with a flick of their finger. We need to help Neo, Mars said without hesitation. I'll call my family and try. It's okay. I called Henry already, Morgan interrupted. She lowered her gaze and stared at her device. The call with Henry had been ongoing for 5 minutes. I suppose you heard everything, Morgan said. I did, Henry's voice came back. You kids don't need to worry. Someone has gone to Auburn already. Who is it? Sir Sebastian. Felix blurted out without realizing she had spoken aloud. They heard Henry's chuckle. I would have liked to send Sir Sebastian, but he is away for another mission. Then who? Felix pressed, her brows furrowed with worry. Neo's vassal, Henry replied, then explained, Neo is the clan leader of the great god clan of Hades. He might not realize it, but he has more than a few powerhouses waiting at his beck and call. Ellipsis. Salavara City, Auburn Country. The air crackled with tension as the massive crack loomed in the sky. Panic buzzed through the city below, with crowds of people being guided to safety by squads of armored Templars. Senora stood on the rooftop of the evacuation headquarters. Her eyes were fixed on the festering crack above. She tapped her foot on the concrete impatiently. Damn it. The cold wind tugged at her cloak as she clenched her fists. She had come here believing the crack might be caused by Neo's return from the shadow world. The news of his entrance into that realm had spread despite Hargraves Corporation's attempts to suppress it. The Senate used this chance to issue a warrant against Neo. Senora had been hoping for this moment, to use the crack as a justification to teach Neo a lesson. She hadn't forgotten how he had insulted her when she and Elijah were sent to ensure he accepted at least 10 fiancés under the Senate's order. She had been humiliated then. Now, she wanted to return the favor, using the full force of the law and her authority. It was only after reaching Auburn that she found out the crack was dragon ranked. I shouldn't have come here, she said with a frustrated tone. Cracks, windows, and portals had the same 5 ranks. Human, tiger, demon, dragon, calamity. A dragon-ranked crack could destroy a country if it wasn't handled correctly. Chapter 335 Return. Author's note. In the last chapter, it should be the Temple of Space that is helping in the evacuation, not the Temple of Void. Senora watched the evacuation process with trepidation. Half of the country, 250 million people, had been evacuated. The high speed of evacuation was mostly thanks to the Templars from the Temple of Space. They used their powers to create portals large enough to ferry entire city blocks at once. Ma'am, the crack is going to transform into a window within an hour, a team member reported. Senora nodded. Her expression was grim, knowing it was not be a normal window but one that would bring out a wandering god. Where are the reporters? She asked. They've been escorted outside of the country, the team member answered promptly. Make sure no one can see or record the battle that will happen soon. Understood, ma'am. The team member left. Another member approached Senora. She saluted Senora. We've completed the barrier, Miss Everly. You can fight without holding back. Thank you, Senora answered with a smile. A giant barrier, encompassing the entire Auber country, had been set up. The barrier separated Auber country from the Earth dimension entirely with a spatial wall. It was powerful enough that even a one-stage god would find it difficult to breach. The barrier's purpose was only one. To ensure the aftermath of the battle remained contained within the country, shielding the neighboring lands from the devastation that was sure to follow. The spatial barrier posed no hindrance to Templars of the Temple of Space, them. Portals continued to flare to life across the city, swallowing masses of people and reappearing in safer lands. Make sure the low-ranked Templars protect the citizens who can't be evacuated in time. Senora abruptly stopped speaking. She snapped her head towards the east. Her senses flared. The barrier in the east flickered violently. What's that? She muttered. Her hand instinctively gripped the hilt of her sword. Something powerful was trying to break the barrier from the outside. Senora took a step forward. The world around her twisted as space folded in on itself. In the blink of an eye, she appeared at the very edge of the barrier, crossing thousands of kilometers in a heartbeat. A huge golden wall stood before her. Her brows furrowed. The wall's light continued to flicker. A huge amount of death surged into the air. Alarms rang in Senora's mind. She didn't understand who was trying to break the barrier, but she doubted they had any kind intentions. All units. I repeat, all units. She shouted into her intercom. Everyone who is not keeping an eye on the crack, proceed to the SCTX-4 barrier section. I repeat, I'm not here to fight. The calm voice interrupted Senora. A portion of the barrier decayed, and a woman stepped through it as if peeling through layers of reality. She had short black hair that came up to her shoulder. An excited grin adorned her face. She flicked her wrist, and the scythe in her hand, with which she had shattered a section of the barrier, disappeared, dissipating into a faint wisp of shadow. Senora's face scrunched up when she recognized the woman. She tapped on her earpiece. Everyone, the issue at the SCTX-4 barrier section has been taken care of. You can return to your posts. I repeat, reinforcements are no longer needed at the SCTX-4 barrier section. The black-haired woman ignored Senora and looked at the crack in the sky. That thing looks nasty, Dorothy said with a whistle. Dorothy. Senora took a deep breath, trying to stop the annoyance seeping into her voice. Why are you here? Only the Temple of Space and Temple of Wind are supposed to be in this country, helping with the evacuation, not the Temple of Death. And, why did you break the barrier? Just enter normally for once, will you? Senora said, exasperation lacing her words. There is no fun in that. Entrances need to be impactful. Dorothy's crazy grin gave Senora a headache. That barrier is, never mind. Just tell me, why are you here? The Senate never told me they were sending the Temple of Death as reinforcement. Because I'm not the reinforcement for you. Quote ellipsis question mark quote. Senora didn't understand her words. Was she talking about a high-profile person who was yet to be evacuated? Dorothy kept her eyes at the crack in the sky. Dark clouds churned around it. Suddenly, a powerful force burst out from the crack, distorting the clouds and making the earth tremble. Silence stretched. Again, the powerful force burst out, followed by a short silence. Senora's expression turned serious. She looked at Dorothy, then back at the crack. I don't know why you are here, but for now, come with me. The crack going to turn into the window any moment now. It will be a problem for us if the Wanderer ignores us and chases after you, since you are the strongest here. Celine snapped her fingers. The world around Dorothy and her zipped past them. The scenery blurred as if they were standing inside a high-speed bullet train. A heartbeat later, they were standing directly below the crack. The aura waves bursting out of the crack were growing stronger and more frequent. It looks like the Wanderer is trying to break the window's barrier and enter our world before the window even forms, Senora muttered. You are wrong, Dorothy spoke up. Notice the increasing aura with each burst. And, it's the sound of steps. Wah. The crack shattered before Senora could question Dorothy. A deafening silence fell. Everyone braced for the avalanche of aura that should have poured out from the newly formed window. Nothing happened. What? Senora muttered, confused, her gaze locked on the sky. The tension was thick enough to cut with a blade. She suddenly heard Dorothy speaking. Nice meeting you. Mind if I get your name? Neo Hargraves. Senora snapped her gaze towards the source of voice. Chapter 336 Return 2. He stood on the same rooftop as Senora and Dorothy, only a few meters away. When did they come out of the window? I sensed nothing. He wore an overcoat that hid most of his body, but Senora could see the scars on his palms, fingers, and neck. Another short scar ran over his lips and another over his eyebrow. His gaze was empty, like that of a blind, helpless person. Yet the way he carried himself gave Senora shivers. Another man stood behind him. He had black hair, green eyes. He looked to be in his early 20s, but the wisdom behind his gaze said he was much older. Senora spent less than a fraction of a second judging them by their appearance. They are at least grade 5 Paragon or higher. Damn it, it's really wandering gods, she thought mistakenly. She tapped on her intercom with a swift speed. Everyone, attack. Senora was about to twist space and attack the men before her. Dorothy swung her scythe and used death to kill Senora's space elementals. Senora couldn't activate her spells. What are you doing? I'm a reinforcement, I told you. Dorothy shrugged. Senora was confused by her actions. Instead of talking sense into her, she looked around, knowing her colleagues would help. But, what? They were frozen midair. It was as if they hadn't moved an inch since the crack broke while transforming into a window. Senora realized time had been stopped. Senora spread out her senses. Even if the colleagues around her were locked in time stop, the ones farther should be able to move. As her senses surged outward, she found a horrible truth. The entire country was frozen in time. The other Templars, who were paragons, were no different. How? She asked, unable to understand the situation. The world's size had increased after the world's ascension centuries ago. Auburn, a mid-sized country, was now twice as large as the biggest country that existed before the Age of Gods. The power of time stop shouldn't be this strong if the range is so large. As much as she wanted to deny the situation in front of her eyes, she couldn't. A shiver ran through her spine. I guess that's enough time to understand the situation. Neo asked with a faint smile. The rooftop trembled slightly under the weight of his presence. Senora flinched when she met his eyes. He was blind, she was sure of it. However, she felt as if he could see her clearly. Yes, I can see you, Neo said, having read her thoughts through her intent. And no, I'm not blind. I have lost my eyes, but, okay, I guess I'm blind technically. His jokes didn't register in Senora's mind. Neo, I think you should let go of the time stop. It's scaring her, Jack said. We will be attacked by hundreds of demigods if I do that. It's either talking to her, explaining the situation, and leaving quietly, or doing as you suggest and fighting all of them, Neo replied. Never mind then. Jack scratched his cheek with an awkward smile. He understood Neo's approach was the best. The demigods would have attacked them if Neo hadn't used time stop. Neo would have had no choice but to fight back. It would have turned the matter into a political disaster if Neo subdued them with force. And who are you? Neo asked Dorothy, even though he already knew her identity. Dorothy, a Templar of the Temple of Death, she answered with a smile. Why did you help me? This. Dorothy took out a stack of documents. The paper rustled softly. The Academy contacted the Temple of Death and asked us to act as your reinforcement if it was you who was coming from the window. Why is the Academy and Temple of Death interfering? Senora asked. She found it hard to breathe. Neo's aura was like death tightening its claw around her throat. Okay. Stop. You are going to kill her. Dorothy used her aura to protect Senora. I'm here to help you, but it would make things hard if you attack her like that. She wouldn't be alive if I wanted to attack. Jack smiled bitterly when he heard Neo. He knew a Templar called Senora had tried to force him to marry and even attacked him when he refused. It seemed the woman in front of him was her. Senora could breathe freely after Dorothy helped her. Why is the Temple of Death and Academy interfering with the Senate's task? She asked instead of thanking Dorothy. You can read these. Dorothy gave the documents to Senora. The edges were marked with official seals. Neo is the Academy's student. Protecting him comes under the Academy's jurisdiction. They hired me for the task. And the Temple of Death agreed. I didn't know you guys mercenaries, Senora said through gritted teeth. The current situation where the Wanderer, Neo, dealt with her team and her easily was a huge blow to her reputation. It would leave a stain on her career. I don't know why the Temple accepted the Academy's request, and I don't really care, Dorothy shrugged. I came here only because I could meet the Underworld's prince. She let out a savage grin. Her hands itched for a fight, sensing Neo's powerful aura. I am glad I came here. Her aura flared, taunting Neo into battle. Neo's eyebrows twitched. This was why he had been pissed as soon as he returned. Dorothy was batshit crazy. Can we wrap things up here? I would love to leave since I'm busy, Neo said. Dorothy blinked, confused. Neo's death aura was suffocating, proof he was a battle junkie like her. Yet he was backing away from a fight. TCH, fine. Dorothy dismissed her scythe. She turned to Senora. I'm taking him. You can't. It's not allowed. The Senate ordered me to handle whoever came out of the crack. Senora, shut up. Senora turned to Neo. Chapter 337 Hungry. It's the rules. How many times are you going to ignore the Senate's orders? Her glare could have bored holes into him if it could. Neo clicked his tongue. He could have left without paying her any heed. It wasn't like she could stop him with force. He, however, decided to confront her. Rules. Neo pursed his lips. You are saying I should let myself be interrogated by you, and maybe even be imprisoned since it's a rule to capture the Wanderers. Yes. Then, that solves the problem. Neo's smile disappeared. According to the rules, you don't have the authority to interrogate me. Huh, what do you? I'm Neo Hargraves. I am the clan leader of the Great Clan of Death, the 73rd ranked Grim Reaper, and the second prince of the Underworld. The air around her seemed to grow heavier as his presence bore down on her. If the pressure before had been suffocating, now it felt as though she was being crushed beneath an ocean, unable to breathe, unable to fight or even resist. Tell me, who are you to dare say you have the authority to interrogate me? Senora took a step back without realizing it. Her heart pounded in her chest. She froze, realizing she was feeling overwhelmed by his presence. A surge of anger and defiance flared within her heart. I'm Senora Everly, the 17th ranked disciple of Senator Sir Nicholas Montague. 17th. A confused look appeared on Neo's face. Not top 3 or top 5. But 17th. Is that a rank to be proud of? It is. Of course you think it is. It's why you are proudly flaunting that pathetic authority. Neo's pressure increased again. It almost brought her to her knees. Tell the Senate to bring someone worthy enough to interrogate me. Then, according to the rules, I will answer their questions. Neo turned around. He looked at Dorothy. She had an excited look, hoping to see more of Neo's strength. It did not seem she had any intention of helping Senora. Crazy bitch, he thought and spoke. Let's go. What about the window? She asked. It will close soon. He had left an intent clone there. Dorothy clicked her tongue. There went her chance of seeing him in action. Remove the time stop before we leave. No. Neo, of course, couldn't say he had no way of removing the time stop. The moment Neo left the window, Beelzebub jumped out of his pocket. That bastard. I was starting to think he cares about me. But no. He ditched me for food the moment we returned. Neo wanted to cry, but he had no tears. He couldn't remove the time stop even if he wanted. Why the fuck was everyone thinking Neo had used time stop? Beelzebub had activated it. He did it to make sure no one disturbed him while he was foraging for food throughout the country. Even the aura Senora felt at first was from Beelzebub. He was trying to stop her time too, only to be unsuccessful. Neo didn't pressure Senora with his aura until he spoke to her a few seconds ago. Hell, he didn't remember who she was until she revealed her name. I'm going to grill that fucker and feed him to Morgan when he returns. Dorothy and Neo moved towards the barrier's opening that Dorothy had made. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth. Faint mist curled around the edges of the broken barrier. Neo used the shadow jump spell to carry himself and Jack. Dorothy, using her plain physical speed, kept up effortlessly. Her footsteps never seemed to touch the ground. Seeing as how both of us have more or less the same speed, she must be grade 2 or grade 1 paragon at this point in time, Neo thought. The two reached the border of the broken barrier. They stepped through and arrived in an abandoned forest. The trees were overgrown. Their twisted branches formed a natural canopy that filtered the dim sunlight. Dorothy had broken the barrier in a secluded place that wouldn't attract attention. Let's use a ride from here, Neo said, his voice echoing slightly in the quiet forest. Sure, Dorothy replied. I'm fine. You don't need to worry about me. Jack muttered, struggling to speak. His back was drenched with sweat, and his face was pale. Neo's sheer power was too much for Jack to handle. Being in close proximity while Neo was using spells and releasing his energy was burdensome for Jack's current self. The trio left the forest. They emerged in a quiet neighborhood with quaint houses and narrow streets. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the paths. Wait, I'll book a cab, Dorothy said, taking out her device. Neo looked at her with a strange expression. Just call your personal driver. No. Dorothy shook her head without a second thought. She had entered Auburn after breaking the barrier meant to protect the country. She knew her driver, butler and guardian, would scold her for such reckless behavior if he came to pick her up. Yup, I'm not calling him in front of these guys. She shook her head again, more firmly this time. The cab arrived before Neo could ask for Dorothy's device and call for a driver from home. The trio entered the cab. The seats were slightly worn but comfortable. It dropped them at the train station. They took a bullet train for Scovia City, where Demigod Academy was located. From there, they took another cab to the academy. Ha ha ha, Dorothy chuckled awkwardly. Contrary to her thoughts, Neo didn't have any problem with public transportation. Though, after spitting at the face of a Templar, claiming he was a high authority figure, only to stand in line to buy tickets for the train, was a very humbling experience. The trio got weird looks wherever they went. Jack was handsome, thanks to devouring countless things and gaining secondary stats related to appearance. Dorothy was a natural beauty. She turned heads everywhere she went. Chapter 338 Uncle Alabama. Neo, on the other hand, looked like a caveman, thanks to his wild long hair, disheveled and tangled like a lion's mane. Why the academy? Neo asked as the cab drove towards the towering gates of Demigod Academy. The order was to escort you safely to the principal, Dorothy replied, her gaze fixed out the window. Neo closed his eyes after hearing the answer. He made it clear he had no intention to talk. System, he called out mentally. Status screen cannot be opened during update. Time remaining. Indefinite. His lips twitched. This thing was still updating after 2 millennia. He wanted to grab the system's creator by the collar and demand a software update. Thankfully, a screen would pop up when he used his primogenitor skill, allowing him to use the skill without any problem. Damn it, thinking about primogenitor made my mood worse. The cab dropped them off at the academy's grand entrance. The large iron gates stood tall, flanked by marble statues of legendary figures. Neo noticed a crowd gathered at the gates, murmuring among themselves. Why are so many people here? Neo spoke to Dorothy, but someone from the crowd answered him instead. We are waiting for Neo Hargraves. Huh. Neo blinked, perplexed. Tisk, dude, why are you looking dumbfounded? Do you not know who he is? It's everywhere in the news that Neo Hargraves had entered Shadow World a few days ago. And today, a wanderer returned from the Shadow World, in the same country where Neo Hargraves and Jack Hanma entered. It has to be them. The guy answered with excitement. Everyone here is waiting to see what kind of reward they received from the Shadow Trial. Neo blinked again, still confused. You guys know about the Shadow Trial? Yup. But between you and me, unlike everyone here who found out about Shadow Trials today from the news, I knew since long ago. The man laughed. Anyway, why are you asking these questions? If you are here, you must be hoping to meet Neo Hargraves or Jack Hanma too. Quote ellipsis quote. When Neo didn't answer, the man shrugged and returned back into the group of onlookers. The crowd murmured amongst themselves excitedly. Neo turned around and looked at Jack and Dorothy, pointing at himself. Do I look that different? My face has 2 tiny scars and my hair is long, otherwise I look the same, no. PFF'd. Jack looked away, trying to control his laughter. His shoulders shook uncontrollably. Neo's brows creased. Why the fuck are you laughing? They didn't recognize your Alabama ass either. Jack looked at Neo with a, seriously, dude, gaze. Having experienced the Age of Gods, he understood the reference all too well. Neo and Jack were able to speak more casually now, as Jack was starting to recover. The pale exhaustion had faded slightly from his face. Though he felt the ache of Emma's lost memories, he was grateful she was alive. A significant part of his mental recovery stemmed from being a sane darkness user. Darkness users were either crazy or possessed insanely high mental strength. Jack was the latter. It's fine. You don't look any different. It's just the air around you has changed so much that it's hard to recognize you, Dorothy said, trying to console Neo. Jack, well, he looks older. Yeah, he's an old uncle now. Still younger than you, Grandpa. Younger than your own kids too. The timeline changed, dude. I don't have kids. Doesn't change the facts, though. They would have been younger than you. Jack and Neo didn't feel offended by the jokes. It was, again, thanks to the darkness. Every moment they could hear thousands of voices inside their head, cursing them relentlessly, telling them to die. Compared to the voices inside their head, the jokes were tame. How do you even know about it? Jack asked. You weren't there when it happened. I have eyes everywhere. Neo dodged the blame with no shame. After all, he might or might not have had a hand in helping Gaia develop a mental attack spell that could work on darkness users, which she gave to Emma, who used it on Jack to hear his confession. Not my fault though. How was I supposed to know she would use it for that? Neo thought, glancing sideways. You saw that. That's disgusting, Jack said, his voice dripping with disbelief. That should be my line. What are you guys talking about? Dorothy said, joining the conversation as her footsteps echoed against the polished floor. The trio talked while moving through the academy. Just something about the Shadow Trial. Ignore it. Shadow Trial. Tell me. She looked at him with expectant eyes. Her curiosity was practically radiating. Neo exchanged a glance with Jack, and the two made an anonymous decision to keep the secret of what happened within the Shadow Trial. The information could shake the world in a negative way. It was an illusion training where we were supposed to resist the 7 deadly sins. Neo started spouting random nonsense that came to mind. The trio stopped outside the office door in the 7th wing. The wooden door was tall, with an ornate crest carved into the center. My job is only until here. I'll see you guys later, Dorothy said with some reluctance, shifting on her feet. I'll tell you what happened next when we meet again. Really? She asked with hopeful eyes. Yes. Thanks. Dorothy left while humming a tune. Her steps were light as she disappeared down the corridor. Neo. Jack called out to him. What? Please never become a story writer. Those random twists and turns will make your readers rage. Sure, Uncle Alabama, I will leave the next part of storytelling to you. Are you going to keep using that name? I am going to tell others the reason behind it too. You wouldn't dare. Hey. A third, tired voice spoke up from within the office, slightly muffled by the door. Can you two stop bickering in front of my door and come inside? Neo looked at Jack and nodded. He opened the door, the hinges creaking slightly, and the two stepped into the office. Chapter 339 Resemblance. Neo felt a powerful intent crash into him as soon as the door opened. The hair on his back stood, and his heart started to beat loudly. The spacious office was brightly lit. Charlotte, sitting behind the desk, smiled faintly. She was not releasing her aura. It was her intent. Like everyone else, she did not have good control over her intent, and it allowed Neo to sense the true depth of her strength. He felt as if he were standing in front of a sun. Its scorching presence was pressing against his very soul. So this is what an exalted demigod feels like. Neo's feet refused to move. Jack, unable to sense her intent, took a step into the room and turned around. You coming? Yeah. Neo shook off the powerful intent holding him in place. He entered the room. Welcome back, Neo, Jack. Charlotte's voice was calm but commanding, resonating through the quiet space. She looked at them. Come sit, have some tea. The duo nodded and followed her words, sitting on the plush chairs opposite her. The scent of aged paper and herbs filled the room. Two dolls appeared silently and began to prepare tea. Jack's eyes were on them. His brow furrowed. The dolls, or puppets depending on what someone called them, looked familiar. Did you see something you recognize? Charlotte, the principal of Demigod Academy, asked. The dolls are similar to the gatekeepers of Shadow World, Jack answered. As that's so, Charlotte smiled. She didn't give any explanation for the similarity in the appearances of the dolls and the gatekeepers. The dolls served the tea. Neo and Jack drank it. As the tea entered their system, their minds became calm, and their recovery systems were boosted. A soothing warmth spread through their bodies, easing tension and fatigue. It's a herbal tea, good for recovery, rejuvenation, and healing. We got it from Tashima last week, Charlotte said, her gaze focused on Neo. Jack nodded absent-mindedly, not knowing about Tashima. Neo, however, seemed surprised as he set down his cup. Tashima, I thought it was still within the Blood Sea's territory. Yes, it was. But the Templars of Water and Poseidon clan recovered it a few days ago. In fact, the news came out while you were inside the Shadow World. Neo froze. Charlotte smiled, noticing his expression. It is a surprise, I must say. How do you know about Tashima? It was named yesterday, after the island was reclaimed from Blood Sea. Wow, fuck. He had thought Charlotte would ask him about the Shadow Trail. Instead, she was trying to see how much he knew about the future. Seems like what I said to her stuck in her mind. After Elizabeth was injured by the Temple of Void, Neo had revealed to Charlotte he knew about the inevitable destruction of the world that should have occurred 300 years ago. I saw the news while we were on the way to the academy, Neo said, attempting to sound casual. As that's so, Charlotte smiled. She didn't pursue the topic further. The three drank the tea in silence. Before long, Charlotte posed a question. Are you planning to reveal what happened in the Shadow Trail and what were the rewards? No. Okay. She placed her teacup down with a soft clink and took out a few documents from the polished mahogany desk. After reviewing them briefly, she passed them to Neo and Jack. Sign them. What is this? The Academy will protect you both if someone tries to force you for information about the Shadow Trial. It's the permission for that, Charlotte explained. The Academy is okay with us keeping the information secret. Jack asked, surprised. He glanced between the papers and Charlotte's calm expression. Yes, it is, Charlotte said. One of the preambles of the Academy is to give the students freedom of choice. We won't force you to do anything you don't want to do. Neo nodded. He knew Charlotte wasn't lying. Even the Shadow Window where Christian and Lenora died was not a compulsory mission. The Academy had given them the choice to enter or, if they wanted, refuse. What if you guys go back on your words? Jack asked sharply. Charlotte raised her brow, surprised. As far as she knew, Jack lacked confidence. He was the last person she expected to question her. Don't worry about it. Charlotte let out a soft chuckle, pleased by his growth. If I was the type to do that, I would have killed Neo already. Quote ellipsis dot exclamation mark quote. Quote ellipsis dot question mark quote. Jack's eyes shot wide open while Neo cocked his head slightly. Charlotte looked at Neo, at his shadow to be exact. Protecting a void entity is grounds for execution. But as you can see, I have no intention of harming Neo Hargraves. You can see what's inside my shadow space. I can. I have special eyes, after all. The old woman's kind smile did not look kind anymore. Neo scoffed. He opened a tiny section of the shadow space over his hand. The shadows converged over his palm, and a single eye peeked out. Velkaria turned to Neo, then looked around, noticing the principal's gaze. What the fuck? Jack flinched, hearing the voice. Neo covered him in his aura to ease his pain. Charlotte hastily created a barrier around the room, stopping the corruption from spreading to outside. You bastard, you told me you would help me. Why did you bring me to a second stage god? If you are trying to kill me, then I'll take you along. She is not a god. Look closely, Neo said, interrupting Velkaria. The eye shifted its gaze toward the surprised Charlotte. Oh, it's a 5th stage awakener. Velkaria released a sigh of relief and continued. What the fuck are you looking at, old hag? Neo made a weird expression, hearing the smugness in her voice. He used intent to deliver a telepathic message to Velkaria. She is stronger than you. So what? She isn't a god or an angel, or a fucking monster like you. She can't kill me. She is stronger than me too. Chapter 340 Talent. Neo spoke aloud this time. He saw no point in using telepathy since Velkaria was practically shouting like a rooster in the morning. But she feels weak. She is holding back her presence. This is an academy with awakeners and mythic demigods. They would suffer damage if the exalted demigods like her in the academy weren't holding back their auras. Velkaria turned back to Charlotte. Her voice took a submissive tone. I apologize for my earlier outburst. I have a mental condition that makes me stupid. Please don't take offense to my words. Charlotte had no words. She was stunned, as she processed the strange apology. She had expected Neo to hide the void entity, since anyone related to void entities could be executed. Neo did the opposite, and it seemed the void entity was not a normal void entity, judging by its powerful void affinity. It's an angel, Neo said. Shut up, bitch. Are you trying to get me killed? The eye glared at Neo before looking at Charlotte. Ha ha ha, he is joking. Please don't believe him. The angel of an outer god, to be exact, Neo said, ignoring Velkaria. Velkaria turned her eye toward Neo, her gaze narrowing. I hate you, asshole. The angel gave up trying to give excuses and dipped into the shadow space. The shadows rippled slightly before settling. If the angel was going to get killed, it saw no point in protesting and decided to rest until then. Quote. Charlotte closed her eyes and massaged them, exhaling softly. The scent of herbal tea lingered in the air as she reopened her eyes, fixing Neo with a stern look. Housing an angel of an outer god. Even I can't save you from being executed for this. So why reveal it to me? I was planning to overlook it, since I thought it was a normal void entity, Charlotte questioned. I'm preparing a witness. For what? Instead of answering, Neo explained something else. I came out of the shadow world. Everything there was made of shadow elementals. Everything. Are you trying to say? Yes, the angel is a shadow. It seemed real to me, not a shadow. That's because it came from a 100% synchro shadow world. What? Charlotte's eyes widened. It was Neo's first time seeing her surprised. A 100% synchro shadow world. Why did the Shadow Supreme send you to a place like that? No, forget that. Tell me, where did you two go? Past, present, future, or was it another world's shadow world? She demanded, leaning forward, her hands pressing into the desk. Quote. Neo remained silent. Charlotte stared at him hard before she sighed again and sank back into her chair. The worn leather creaked slightly under her weight. Never mind. If you aren't planning to tell me, I can't force you. She looked at Jack and questioned with her gaze sharp. Is this why he lost his powers? Yes, Jack answered. I was tainted by void. So you have void affinity now. I do. I see, Charlotte said. She felt a headache incoming. I don't know if you know this, but among the countless enemies our world has, outer gods are one of them. They are the most dangerous enemies of ours. Just having void affinity means you came in contact with them, since void affinity can be gained only by coming in contact with them. If your void affinity awakens, everyone will know you have the void affinity. It will be believed you are in cahoots with the outer gods. You will be chased to the end of Blood Sea and executed when caught. She rubbed her temples gently. Don't try to awaken the void affinity, she warned. Understood, Jack said, but his gaze said something else. Why can't I have a normal time during my last days? Charlotte sighed, noting his reaction. She looked at Neo, who remained composed. The angel you have is a shadow. I suppose you want me to be a witness to that fact. Yes, since you are the principal of the Demigod Academy, your words carry a lot of weight. Fine, I will act as your witness, she said reluctantly. Charlotte wanted to refuse, but thoughts of Elizabeth made her agree. She talked a bit more before allowing them to leave. Just as Neo and Jack were about to stand, Charlotte suddenly spoke. Jack, go meet Professor Rundle. He will turn your body's time back and help your physical age return to that of a teenager, Charlotte said. Huh, Jack blinked, confused. Why are you looking at me like that? Aren't you going to continue studying in the academy? Charlotte's gaze was calm yet stern. But I'm not a kid anymore. The academy doesn't have an age restriction. We only accept students depending on whether they have talent or not. You have talent. That's why we will help you regain your powers. Of course, if you want to leave the academy, we won't stop you, Charlotte said, folding her hands on the desk. Neo, on the side, was surprised. It was his first time hearing something like this. Does that mean I have talent too? He thought with furrowed brows. Charlotte noticed Neo's expression and offered a bitter smile. Your case is a bit unique.